Okay, we'll reconvene the Monday, November 8th Dublin City Council meeting. Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Noble is here with us this evening, and our veterans, so I'd ask if you would all stand and come forward and lead us in the pledge. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Our veteran among our corps has a proclamation that he would like to present to you. So, John, if you want to.
Thank you. If you'd all step forward, please. Come on, guys. Whereas in November 1919, President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed November the 11th as the first commemoration of Armistice Day to recognize those heroes who had served our country during World War I. And whereas in 1954, Congress approved renaming that day to Veterans Day to expand the significance of the commemoration and honor American veterans of all wars. And whereas Veterans Day is a day set aside to remember the sacrifices of all who fought so valiantly on the seas, in the airs, and on foreign shores to preserve our heritage of freedom. And whereas there are 19 million veterans across the United States who have preserved the peace domestically and throughout the world over decades of conflicts, and whereas Ohio is the home to more than 848,000 veterans, the sixth largest population in the United States. And whereas President Joe Biden has proclaimed November 2021 as National Veterans and Military Families Month, and whereas the veterans, the Washington Township, and the Dublin High School Honor Roll will be dedicated at its new location at the grounds of Remembrance in Dublin's Veteran Park, and whereas the City of Dublin and the Wesley G. Davis American Legion Post 800 invite veterans, their families, and all the Dublin citizens to a public ceremony at the grounds of Remembrance on the 11th day of the 11th month, Thursday, November 11th, at the 11th hour for the time recognized for this remembrance. Now, therefore, I, on behalf of Chris Ambrose Grooms, Mayor of the City of Dublin, on behalf of the Dublin City Council, do hereby proclaim this week of November 8th through 14th as Veterans Week in the City of Dublin, urging all citizens to recognize the sacrifices made by veterans in preserving our freedoms, encouraging all citizens to display the U.S. flag and to participate in patriotic activities throughout this week. Signed this 8th day of November, Chris Ambrose Grooms, our mayor. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Colonel, would you like to say something?
I would.
Good to see you guys.
Madam Mayor, members of council, you know me as the commander of American Legion Post 800, but I am also the chair of your Veterans Advisory Committee. And in that role, or in dual hat role, I'd like to give you a little bit of an update. The committee has been fairly busy. One of the first items on our agenda was the honor roll. The honor roll is a recreation of a wooden monument that was first displayed outside Dublin Schoolhouse, now known as the 1919 building, during World War II, listing those who were serving. The original and subsequent designs deteriorated due to natural effects. Subsequent to that, a granite monument was replaced it, but it has also eroded, and because of the building of schools and parking lots and whatever, you'd never know it was there. The honor roll's poor condition led the Veterans Committee to rejuvenate this dedication and replace it at the grounds of Remembrance in May of 2021. Our committee worked with staff to ensure that the design and location were appropriate, and we will rededicate the monument on Veterans Day in the park. We are proud to have worked with the city to honor many who served during World War II from the Dublin community. The second item was the Purple Heart City. Our own Sean Clifton initiated a move to make Dublin a Purple Heart City. And the Veterans Committee was honored to present Council with the recommendation to that effect. We are incredibly thankful that Council concurred with our recommendation and made it a top priority during the unveiling of these new beautiful council chambers, your first seating as I remember it, to honor those who received such a distinct recognition as a result of their own sacrifice and service to this country. We are proud to have been part of the city's effort to communicate, acknowledge, and support for travelers and residents alike. The Veteran Committee also provided staff input and direction regarding an official DublinVeterans.com website. And if you haven't looked at it, I would suggest you take a shot because it's kind of interesting. You certainly can see all of the old ceremonies that were recorded, that sort of thing. We hope that this website serves as a clearinghouse for all those things Dublin Veteran, providing resources, information, and invitations to events. The next item is called the Grounds of Remembrance QR Code Trail. When you next visit the Grounds of Remembrance, you will find informational signs scattered throughout the park displaying QR codes. If scanned with a smartphone, these codes will open a quick video with contextual and Dublin-specific historical information related to each attraction in the park. Veterans Committee member Mike Kehoe will serve as your virtual guide through the park. Additionally, the map displayed on your screen will be displayed on a rotational basis in the library in an effort to attract more visitors to the ground. We are incredibly appreciative of the Dublin Metropolitan Library and city staff for their collaboration with our Veterans Committee on this project. It's really kind of a neat idea. And I will say, as far as traffic in the park, with the advent of the suspension bridge, it's just been all over the place. People just keep on walking and walk right up that hill. Coordinating Memorial Day activities. American Legion Post 800 and the Veterans Committee work annually alongside Dublin City and Dublin City Schools. Excuse me. Oh, come on. You can do this, Jeff. I know you can. To coordinate memorial activities to honor those who have served our country. Veterans Day activities. American Legion Post 800 and the Veterans Committee also work annually alongside Dublin and Dublin City Schools and other collaborators to coordinate the city's Veterans Day ceremony at the Grounds of Remembrance. I would invite any and all of you to join us this year on Thursday, November 11th. The day begins with a complimentary breakfast for veterans at La Chatelaine starting around 8:30. If you haven't done this, come on in. You're going to see a lot of veterans sucking up coffee and whatever, croissants, I guess. We will then hold a ceremony at the Grounds of Remembrance in Dublin Veterans Park at 11 o'clock. Keynote speaker this year is U.S. Army veteran John Lane. John Lane was a helicopter pilot and a really good guy because he's my nephew. And he's also one of the principal owners of the Winking Lizard chain, if you've ever been to a Winking Lizard. Music will be provided by the Sells Middle School Band and the Dublin Wind Symphony this year. Our soloist for the National Anthem is Samantha Reeves. And if some of you have heard her before, she did our last event, Veterans Day event, and she's got an awesome voice, just awesome. So please do join us for this event. Thank you.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel, we certainly appreciate what you do. When you read down this list, it's really a list of people that have served this community selflessly, with grace and dignity, and really the folks here tonight represent some of the best that we have. And not only do you serve this country, you serve this community on a regular basis, and including our own general over here. That is not lost on us, and we sincerely appreciate it. We look forward to a great celebration on Thursday. And thank you for coming tonight and all the work you've done, and certainly the update. You all been busy with your QR codes and everything else, so we really appreciate that work.
Next year, we hope to have a couple more on the plate, so thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. So good to see you. Would like to take a moment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak on any item that is not on this evening's agenda? I have some cards here, but I believe they are all relative to an agenda item that we will be addressing. But if you'd like to speak relative to an item that is not on this evening's agenda, please signify, and we would be happy to bring you forward. Hearing and seeing none. Is there a request to remove any item from the consent agenda? It only consists of the October 25th regular meeting minutes. Hearing none, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
We have one postponed item, Ordinance 68-21.
To adopt the annual operating budget for fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022.
Thank you. And Mr. Stifler has our staff report. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Good evening, members of council. Ordinance 68-21 contains the requested changes to the proposed 2022 operating budget, and staff are recommending approval at tonight's council meeting.
Very good. Thank you. Would like to take a moment to solicit public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion. Thank you for all of your hard work on this, Matt. We spent a lot of time, and I know you've spent a tremendous amount of work, you and your team in the finance, so appreciate all of that. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Second reading, public hearing ordinances, Ordinance 69-21.
Amending various sections of Ordinance 1517 Compensation Plan for Non-Union Personnel and modifying the 2022 operating budget position authorization.
Thank you. And our staff report will be Mr. Rogers. Welcome, Homer.
Good evening, members of council. Ordinance 6921, which amends Ordinance 1517, was originally presented on October 25th, 2021. The changes within the ordinance have already been briefed to you. However, there is one administrative change that has been made. Under Section 9, Paragraph H, Subpoint 1, there was a reference to Section 14C, which was a section to be removed as recommended in the first reading. This reference has been removed and updated accordingly. No other amendments have been made since the first reading of Ordinance 6921. Subject to any questions you may have, staff recommends approval at this time.
Very good. Thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion. I think we had all of those answers at first reading, so appreciate all the work, Homer. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo? Yes. Mr. Peterson? Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Ordinance 70-21.
Rezoning one parcel and one partial parcel, both city-owned, from R1 Restricted Suburban Residential District to SO Suburban Office and Institutional District to establish the Right Way Corporate Park totaling approximately 9.02 acres located northeast of the Emerald Parkway and Riverside Drive intersection.
Thank you. And Ms. Holt, we have you back for your second time.
How about that? Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome.
Good evening, Council. There are no updates to report since the first reading, so we're requesting approval of this ordinance tonight.
Very good, thank you. I'm going to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion.
I just have one. The Planning and Zoning had some questions about this, and I think that we all agree that this is a good use for the partial, but there is sensitivity to Billingsley Creek going forward because it's such a sensitive area with all the historic mounds and such that I would recommend that as we go forward and look at the development of this, the Planning and Zoning has an opportunity to take a look at this and continue to help us enhance and guarantee that those areas are sensitively developed, primarily the green spaces, Billingsley Creek, such like that, because this will go to standard office, institutional, and it really is because it'll be a development agreement. It will be such that this council will say who gets to review it, and I think because of the consideration of Planning and Zoning bringing some issues up, that it might not be a bad idea to allow them to get another sensitive review and give us some of the recommendations on those natural areas and the development of that. So I would just leave that to your consideration.
Okay, just for the point of clarity, I mean, whatever building would come here would come before the Planning Commission, right? So,
my understanding is it wouldn't necessarily unless council gave it to the Planning and Zoning Commission to review.
is this straight zoning?
It is straight zoning, yes.
Right, and that's why I bring it up.
Okay. Other comments from council? I think that what's really I don't disagree with you, but I think that another thing that is very important is going to be when whatever the balance of this R1 parcel that's immediately to the north develops and where the green space that's contributed at that point in time, because that's really where most of the really precious ground is, in that parcel immediately to the north. So
I know sometimes on development agreements, we'll have Planning and Zoning review things. I believe that with all of the reassurances from economic development that this will be a two-story, sensitively placed, natural. My concern is certainly not the development of the commercial property because I think it will be done well. The greenway along Billingsley is a direct connection to the river and then over to the park. And I believe that maybe the common goal is to be sure that that is treated sensitively. And of course, if council takes the time to look at all of those little aspects, certainly it wouldn't have to go to Planning and Zoning. But since the recommendation was differing, I believe that it might behoove us to allow them to give some recommendation on how Billingsley Creek is addressed. Even though we have a 75-foot buffer, there's just an opportunity there that maybe on that aspect alone, they take a look. It's just a thought, and certainly I'm sure that the development will be beautiful no matter who looks at it, but it was just a suggestion.
okay, thank you. Other comments?
Just to be clear on that, Jane, are we saying for any future development, right? So you're not saying, I just want to be clear, I understand. You're saying, you're asking in if and when there's future development, it comes back to planning and zoning. But this would move forward as is, or do I misunderstand
No,
that?
this would move forward. This would definitely move forward. The commercial development will come back, and it's straight zoning. And so since it's a development agreement, there's an opportunity for it to be reviewed again. Or I would suggest this, not reviewed again, but definitely sensitivity when it comes back for this Billingsley Creek area, because that was the major concern of planning and zoning, was to be sure that those natural areas were sensitively treated. So that, I think that's what I'm most concerned about.
Do you think it's sufficient that this be noted now, that staff would do that? I mean, are you comfortable with this conversation that?
I'm comfortable with the rezoning. I'm comfortable with plat. I think it's just that as we go forward, because planning and zoning had some concerns about, the Billingsley Creek and the conservation area, that it has either had a second eyes, or we note that that was their concern, and that we are very sensitive to it as this development moves forward. And I think that's basically all I'm asking for.
But the 75-foot setback is in place.
It is in place. It's absolutely in place. Will it be enough? I don't know. Will we need to be, I haven't walked that side or anything, but that was their concern, to be sure that that all was treated sensitively, because it is such a precious area. So it just needs a second set of eyes, whether that's ours or planning and zoning when it comes to that. Am I making sense here? Do you know what I'm saying?
If I might, I will be explaining all of that with the plating section of this, and I have a presentation ready to talk about the amount of detail that was gone into with those studies and how the setbacks and the no disturb zones were arranged.
I think that's really important and very helpful too, because that was their concern, and so that's why I bring it up. But as for the use and what we have in front of us, I'm really happy with that, and I think that that's going to be a perfect place for this development.
That portion of the conversation is probably left either to we have both the preliminary and the final plat this evening, so that might be most appropriate final plat to make those notes of whatever we would want for whoever would develop that property to be aware of. So, okay. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo? Yes. Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 71-21.
Authorizing the city manager to execute and accept all necessary conveyance documents to acquire a 0.181 acres fee simple warranty deed and a 0.076 acre temporary construction and grading easement from Delaware County parcel number 6003440805600 from the Muirfield Village Golf Club.
And our staff report this evening will be from Mr. Hammersmith. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Good evening, members of council. There is no new information to present to council this evening beyond that presented at the first reading. Again, I wish to express the city's appreciation to the Muirfield Village Golf Club for their donation of these easements and their continued cooperation on this project. Staff does recommend adoption of this ordinance. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? Hey, Paul, I noticed on the drawing that there is actually going to be a curb cut on Dublin Road that will service this building.
Yes.
And is that going to be a paved lot? Will that be a gravel lot? What's that going to be?
I've actually put an exhibit up on the screen. It's going to be a paved surface, and that entrance onto Dublin Road will be paved as well. So you can just barely see it in the drawing right here, but here's the entrance driveway coming off of Dublin Road on the west side. And there'll actually be a break in the guardrail. We're actually going to shorten up the guardrail along the west side, just north of Deer Run.
Then will there be planting that happens between the structure to be constructed and Dublin Road?
Yes. There'll be a whole host of landscaping, arborvitaes that come around and wrap the site and screen it between the facility and Dublin Road.
Okay, because I did not see those items in the report, but there
That's
is
true.
sufficient planting?
It's on the construction drawings themselves. And that was a comment that came from the Planning and Zoning Commission, was to provide more screening for the site and then focus more on tree preservation, which has been done.
Okay, and then you'll have the destruction of that existing building that's there and probably have some restoration in that area as well?
Yes, that's correct. And actually, that building is shown on the drawing, so that's that small rectangle right here, existing building.
I walked it this weekend, and it just seemed like a very nice, natural setting. So I'm hopeful that when we're finished, it's not going to be as natural, but it will be reminiscent of what it is at present.
We are going to do our best to make it invisible from the roadway and from the golf course. But at the same time, we are conscious of the aesthetics. And again, a comment that came from the Planning and Zoning Commission on the exterior of the building itself to use a stone veneer consistent with what's been used in Dublin on our other projects.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments? Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo? Yes. Mr. Peterson? Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes. Thank you. Ordinance 72-21.
Amending Section 34.02 definitions and enacting new Section 34.08 virtual meetings of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Dublin, Ohio to permit municipal body members to hold, attend, and conduct public meetings virtually.
Great, and our staff report will be by Ms. Radler. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening, members of council. There have been no revisions to the ordinance since first reading. We did receive direction from council regarding the rules of order, and those have been incorporated. It's a resolution further down on your agenda. I'm happy to take any questions, and we recommend approval of the ordinance.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion?
I have a question, Jennifer. In the definition of virtual, using video and audio to connect online via live streaming, we don't talk about telephone. And the reason I asked that is because I had a question today about including someone on a committee meeting via telephone. And I didn't know the answer to it. So I'm just wondering if you could help me with that.
So we do say using audio to connect online, and I think the intent of that is how we hold the meeting, not how any one individual would participate in the meeting. So we would always want to stream the meeting online, but if we had a member who couldn't participate and got the waiver to participate and could only connect on phone, we have provision for that in the rules. And then the public can participate if you wish in any way you deem appropriate.
Okay, that's helpful. I wasn't sure in reading that whether it meant that you had to connect online only. All right, thank you.
I think the intention was to have audio and video as priority number one. And in the event that we weren't able to meet that threshold for a host of various reasons, that would be a secondary choice. Okay, any further questions, discussion? Hearing none. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Peterson?
Oh, hold on.
I'm sorry, I thought we had to make a decision on the wording on that.
The wording
You had
on,
a choice between the wording on,
you provided direction at the last meeting, and we've incorporated that in the resolution that's coming up later on in the
oh,
agenda.
that's right, it's coming up next. I'm sorry, Chris.
Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Peterson? Yes. Ms. Fox?
Yes,
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo? Yes. Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Okay, introduction, first reading, public hearing, ordinances. Ordinance 73-21.
Establishing the location and amount of cash on hand for change funds.
Thank you. And we'll be back with Mr. Stifler.
Good evening. Ordinance 73-21 updates Chapter 35 of Dublin's Codified Ordinances to better reflect current finance operations. The cash boxes in planning and building standards are no longer needed as Acela has made cash transactions obsolete at that location. The cash box in taxation is significantly underutilized, and there's a cash box in the adjacent finance operations. So this ordinance would remove those 3 cash boxes from those locations in order to better reflect the needs of the current finance operations. So with that, staff recommends approval at the next reading at November 15th.
Very good, thank you. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? It makes sense to have one less, or a few less cash drawers to have to keep track of, so appreciate you looking into that and making those recommendations. We'll look forward to second reading public hearing on November the 15th.
Thank you.
Ordinance 74-21.
Amending Chapter 35 of the Codified Ordinances to revise the schedule of fees and service charges for the City of Dublin services.
I will introduce that, and we will have our staff report. Mr. Stifler again, and he's going to be joined by Megan Murray.
Yes, thank you, Council. It's my pleasure to introduce to Council our financial analyst, Megan Murray. She joined the city in March of this year. Previously, she spent 3 years as a budget analyst with the Davenport, Iowa, and before that, she was actually an intern in the city manager's office. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to her.
Well, welcome, Megan. A bit of a homecoming for you. Glad to have you.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. So good evening, Council. Ordinance 74-21 is the 2021 update to the city's fees schedule. In more detail, Ordinance 74-21 is the biannual inflationary update to the city's schedule of fees and service charges. Next year, the Finance Department will conduct a comprehensive analysis to update the schedule for 2023. An inflationary measure of 1.1% was applied to the services provided by the listed departments. In addition to these inflationary adjustments, Parks Operations, Court Services, and Recreation are recommending some more substantive charges that we will examine in further detail. Parks Operations Cemetery Fee Update. Niche engraving has been performed by Columbus Art Memorial, CAM, who constructed the city's first columbarium. The rate for niche engraving was $150 per occurrence, but CAM has since gone out of business. Modlick Monument, who constructed the city's new columbarium, now provides the niche engraving service. For security reasons, the panels, which are 2 feet by 3 feet and weigh about 120 pounds, are removed each time a niche is engraved. The fee for niche engraving, which is done off-site by Modlick Monument, is $425. Subsequently, Parks Operations has proposed an increase from $150 to $425 per occurrence. Court Services Fee Update. In order to increase some administrative clarity, a note has been added to Mayor's Court Services for the Adult Traffic Diversion Review Fee. The following note further explains that there are 4 costs that comprise the Adult Traffic Diversion Review Fee. This fee is dependent upon state court costs, court service fees, which can be more depending upon case history and action taken by the court, the computer fund fee, and fine processing. A $49.95 fee for the online driving course is collected by the National Safety Council, of which $25 is remitted back to the city. Recreation Fee Update. In order to provide access to the Dublin Community Recreation Center, the Dcrc facility, to Dublin residents and their guests, a new Dcrc admission pass type was added into the fee schedule in 2020. This pass allows a Dcrc member who is a resident to purchase daily passes in quantities of 5 or 10 visits for the resident's guests. Staff is proposing an increase of $5 for the purchase of 5 visits and an increase of $10 for 10 visits, which would bring the cost of 5 visits to $45 and 10 visits to $90. In addition to updating the guest of resident visitor pass rate, the following proposed language has been recommended for inclusion in the fee schedule for the Dcrc annual passes. The Dublin Community Recreation Center Dcrc annual pass fees listed are maximum fees to be charged. The Director of Recreation has the authority to adjust annual pass fees and/or run seasonal pricing specials as needed in order to achieve Recreation Center membership goals or divisional cost recovery goals. The Recreation Department is responsible for reporting on the results and impacts of any fee adjustments or seasonal specials to City Council. The objective is to provide new opportunities for recreation staff to meet divisional cost recovery goals by allowing staff to explore new marketing plans and special pricing in order to grow annual pass sales back to pre-pandemic levels. So recommendations. Staff recommends referring the Recreation Cost Recovery Policy Review to the Finance Committee for additional conversation, as funding goals to support desired facility updates have not been yet met. Staff also recommends approval of Ordinance 74-21 at the second reading and public hearing on November 15th, 2021, and these fees would then become effective on January 1st, 2022. Thank you, and at this time I'm available for any questions.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Want to take a moment for public comment? Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion? Kathy?
Hi, Megan. I just had a couple of questions. So just for my own clarity, so there's an inflationary increase.
Yes.
I had noticed in the appendix, and I'm just happened to be on the first page of Appendix A, some fees were increased, but others weren't. So
Yes.
it isn't inflationary across the board. Can you educate me a little bit about that? Thank you.
Yes. So our finance team, we take the inflationary rate and we do look at how the current revenues are currently meeting cost recovery goals for each of these. So each of these different fees has its own cost recovery goal that is analyzed by the amount of revenue that we have received in the previous year for that fee. So the 1.1% inflationary rate was not necessary. Then that fee did not receive the inflationary rate to help meet the cost recovery goal because it has already been met.
So if it's at 100%, what if it's at 105? Would we decrease any of the rates or any of them proposed to be decreased?
I have not seen any that were proposed to be decreased, but if that was something that we were interested in looking into, or if we found any, we could bring that to your attention.
Well, it just seems that if the goal is 100% and it's 110,
Yes.
yeah, I'm that. And if we're going to imply inflation to get us up closer to the 100 or whatever, I would just, it seems that we ought to apply those in a consistent manner. So that was my question. And maybe it's all in there, but when I was looking at this, I was just confused as to why some are increasing or others.
Yes, and just to add as clarification, cost recovery is not 100% for each of these fees. It varies depending on council policy and different administrative policies as well.
Yeah, and it's nice. It does indicate on here what that is, and I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yes.
Thank you. And on the DCRC fees, I think that's great that the finance group's going to spend some time because you've got this sort of tug and pull between how do you invite someone to come back and how do you raise rates to cover cost. And that's a bit of a tug and a pull. And I think it's a good thing to spend some time really looking at that because the goal, of course, is usage, right? We want the community to be able to and use it. So I appreciate your referring that to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we will look forward to seeing you again on November the 15th for second reading.
Thank you.
Ordinance 75-21.
Authorizing the rescinding of the merchandising fund and transferring the fund balance to the general fund.
Thank you. We'll stick with Mr. Stifler.
Good evening, members of council. Ordinance 75-21 rescinds Fund 630, the merchandising fund, created by Ordinance 11-93. This fund was created as an enterprise fund to support more merchandising efforts related to economic development strategy in the 1990s. It has not been used since 2017 and has no plans for future use. Rescinding this fund will not prevent the city from selling merchandise in our other special revenue funds. It will just eliminate this, frankly, outdated enterprise fund that we've established for these activities. Staff recommend your approval of this ordinance at the November 15th council meeting.
Great. Thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion? You're cleaning things up over there, aren't you, Matt?
We are doing it in time for year end.
We appreciate that. We'll see you back on November the 15th for second reading. Ordinance 76-21.
Amending Chapter 51 and 52, establishing user fees and capacity charges for the sanitary sewer and water systems.
Thank you. And Matt, we'll stick with you.
Good evening, council. Ordinance 76-21 increases water and sanitary sewer rates as previously recommended and proposed in the 2022 through 2026 CIP. During that conversation, we proposed a 3% rate increase for water and a 4% rate increase for sewer. You can see on this slide the historical rates for those programs dating back to 1992 and the amount of revenue that those rate increases are estimated to generate. The historical fund balance target for these funds is 25% of the historical value of each system's capital assets. The systems have very similar asset values and very similar target fund balances of $16.4 million. The water fund is currently at $12.3 million, or 75% of target. The sewer fund is at $6.7 million, or 41% of target. In order to help continue to meet those target fund balance goals and support the operations of water and sewer in the City of Dublin, staff are recommending that we adopt this ordinance at the next hearing on November 15th.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? Matt, are these rate increases consistent with the increases that we're seeing in the maintenance, in sewer lining and?
I'll write a response to that and give you more detailed information, but what's really driving the rate increase in sewer is some of the additional debt that we're taking on, particularly what is upcoming in the sewer fund for those relief sewers 2 and 3 years out. And in order to not have a jump after that type of construction, I wanted to ease into those projects, and that's causing some of the pressure on the sewer fund.
And with these increases, when do you suspect we would get back to our targets in reserves?
I don't have a timeline for the sewer fund. The water fund will probably depend on usage, and if we could bring in some more light industrial manufacturing type users that were heavy users, we could see quicker. We haven't established that we actually want to get to that goal, a timeline. If council would like to have that conversation, I'd be happy to have that conversation with the finance committee and kind of map out what rates might be, but they'd be significantly more than the rates that I've outlined here.
I just think it might be interesting to line up what our increasing costs are for sewer lining and water line maintenance, because the system is aging, so that number is, going up. And I'm not suggesting that we change these numbers at all, but maybe we would have a look, say, we're at this percent for this year, in 2 years, anticipate this percent, or whatever that case may be, just so we have a projection of what might be coming.
Sure.
Down the pipe, as it were, no pun intended.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll see what I can draft up to answer that question.
Great, thank you. Other comments, discussion? We will look forward to a second hearing on that on the 15th as well. And don't go anywhere, because Ordinance 77-21.
Declaring the improvement to certain parcels of real property in the city's Bridge Street district to be a public purpose and exempt from taxation, providing for the collection and deposit of service payments, and specifying the purposes for which those service payments may be expended, specifying the public infrastructure improvements directly benefiting the parcels, and authorizing compensation payments to the Dublin City School District and the Tolles Career and Technical Center.
Thank you. Mr. Stifler.
Ordinance 77-21 establishes a tax increment financing district in Bridge Park over Block G. We are requesting this authorization under Ordinance ORC 5709-41 to create this TIF. The City Council has previously reviewed and approved the planning and zoning, including the basic plan and the final development plan and revised final plat in April and May earlier this year, respectively. The creation of this TIF under this section of the revised code establishes commercial TIFs. City Council previously approved in 2015 an incentive district or residential TIF for the entire Bridge Park development, so the two TIFs would be layered on top of each other. Block G is planned to house a mixed-use office space, a parking structure, and a residential building. Private improvements are estimated to be valued at approximately $20.2 million, and based on the minimum values established for each of these product types, is expected to generate $22.5 million in TIF revenues over the 30-year life of the TIF. These TIF proceeds will be used to retire debt on the Bridge Park community facilities. The establishment of this TIF is consistent with other TIFs that have been approved within Bridge Park, including blocks B, C, A, Z, D, and F, and is essentially required as part of the development agreement with Crawford Horing in order to provide the funding for the community facilities located in Bridge Park. Staff is recommending approval at the second reading on November 15th.
Thank you. You want to take a moment for public comment if there's anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion?
Matt, just for clarification, the parking structure in this Block G, who's the owner of the parking structure? That is not a city parking?
That is not a city facility, correct?
Okay, thank you.
I just have one question relative to the residential. Are those 86 dwelling units, are those for sale or for lease? Any idea?
I don't know. I'll get back with you on that. If they're a for sale product, they'd be in the residential TIF. If they're a commercial product, they'll be in this new TIF.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We will look forward to hearing more about that on the 15th as well. And Ordinance 78-21.
Declaring the improvement to certain parcels of real property in the city's Bridge Street district to be a public purpose and exempt from taxation, providing for the collection and deposit of service payments, and specifying the purposes for which those service payments may be expended, specifying the public infrastructure improvements directly benefiting the parcels, and authorizing compensation payments to the Dublin City School District and the Tolles Career and Technical Center.
Thank you. Working overtime tonight, Matt.
This is my last one, though. So Ordinance 78-21 creates the Primrose TIF. The Primrose School is constructing a two-story, 15,000 square foot child daycare facility located within the Bridge Street district on the southern half of the parcel highlighted in yellow. Ordinance 78-21 creates a tax increment financing in the Bridge Street district on that parcel. This TIF is located in the area of the city's owned Bridge Street and is subject to the Dublin City Schools Cooperative Agreement under Bridge Street. The payment terms are outlined on this slide. And in consideration for this incentive structure, the City of Dublin makes annual payments to the Dublin City Schools in order to create these TIFs. This TIF is estimated to generate approximately $1.9 million over its 30-year time horizon. In years 1 through 15, it'll generate about $65,000 and a little less than that in the last 15 years. This is on private improvement value of about $2.2 million. And these service payments will be used to provide funding for debt service related to the public infrastructure improvements serving Bridge Street. So these TIF service payments will replace debt service payments that are currently being paid by income tax for the pedestrian bridge and Riverside Crossing Park. So that's what these payments would be utilized for. Staff recommend adopting this ordinance at the second hearing on November 15th.
Great, thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? Matt, I just have one question. Originally, in the Bridge Street infrastructure plan, there was a roadway that bifurcated this parcel. So that was abandoned apparently for the development of this, but is there a fee that is being paid to fund whatever infrastructure might be appropriate moving forward that's in the general area?
There are no commitments made with these TIF revenues for any particular infrastructure. There was some infrastructure created to access the daycare. I believe that there was a road created on this parcel to access that daycare site, but this TIF is not subject to any development agreements.
Okay. Thank you. We'll look forward to hearing the balance of that on November the 15th as well. Brings us to Ordinance 79-21.
Authorizing the provision of certain incentives to NERX, Inc., or one of its affiliated companies to induce it or such affiliated company to lease a facility to create an office and its associated operations and workforce, all within the city, and authorizing the execution of an economic development agreement.
Thank you. And we'll have our staff report from Ms. Gilger. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you. Good evening. NERX is a San Francisco-based telemedicine company, and staff has been working with them to identify a 6,000 square foot lease facility. This would be for a closed-door, non-retail pharmacy. The proposal includes a 4-year 15% performance incentive, and the company would be required to sign an 8-year lease of at least 6,000 square feet. This project would create 43 new jobs to Dublin, and we are actually delaying our recommendation to the December 6th meeting where we will do our second reading. The company wanted to get a little further in their negotiations on where they're going to select their building. So we recommend approval on December 6th.
Great, thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none, council questions, discussion? Well, we will look forward to seeing you then on December the 6th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ordinance 80-21.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a real estate purchase agreement for certain property owned by Shepard Land Holding Company in Franklin County and Madison County, Ohio, authorizing the execution of related agreements and documents and appropriating funds therefor.
Thank you. And we will go back with Jennifer Randler. Welcome.
Good evening again, council members. City Council has discussed the need to strategically purchase property, and as the city continues to build out, opportunities to purchase will diminish. The city has experienced much success over the years through such purchases for economic development, transportation, and recreational uses. After negotiations with the owner, the purchase price of the premises that you are considering in this ordinance has been determined to be $100,000 per usable acre, which is defined in the real estate purchase agreement. It's consistent with the price paid for other purchases in the area. The real estate purchase agreement outlines all terms, conditions, and closing requirements for the property. There are 2 financing options that we wanted to raise for council consideration. The Finance Department provided the following options. First is to utilize the general fund balance to provide cash for 100% of the acquisition cost. This option's in compliance with the general fund balance policy regarding the fund balance level. As this has been the historical preference of council, this ordinance includes an appropriation from the general fund for this purchase. Another option is short-term financing. And so that we would require an advance for the acquisition costs that would be appropriated from the general fund to the capital improvement construction fund. The advance would be repaid early in 2022 when the short-term note proceeds are received. This note could be paid off in full, rolled into a future long-term debt issuance, or rolled forward to future years as the city works to develop the property. There are some costs associated with that, which are outlined in the memo. Staff recommends approval of the ordinance at second reading on November 15th, and both myself and Finance Department reps are happy to answer any questions.
Very good, thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none, council questions, discussion?
I'd be curious as to Matt's thoughts on the short-term financing.
Thank you, Councilmember Fox, for the question. I'm not making any recommendation that we would need to utilize that at this time, but I wanted to just begin to open up that subject because as the general fund balance begins to get closer to 50%, if we want to continue to acquire land, particularly large pieces of land, we may have to consider that in order to remain in policy compliance. So I wanted to start having that conversation now while we're well in advance of the policy. I think there are a lot of benefits to utilizing short-term financing to purchase land. The number one benefit being we could do everything we're currently doing, but retroactively instead of prospectively. So instead of determining to buy all of the land up front, we could make a determination to finance the land for 1 year. We're only making a determination to finance it for 1 year. Short-term interest rates are extremely low. At the end of that year, we would know how our general fund balance did, and we could decide to pay off some, all, or none of the principal associated with that and roll it into another year. We could purchase multiple pieces of land using this strategy and roll them forward such that we wouldn't have to engage in a long-term debt issuance. I'd hate to pay 20 years for land that we might be able to flip in 5, and then we're making a debt payment on land we don't have control over. I wouldn't want to put us in that position. But this kind of strategy gives us the opportunity to always be ahead of the fund balance instead of fighting it or behind it, which is a situation we definitely don't want to be in.
Andy.
First, I'd like to commend Dana and I think Chris for making this even possible. So it's very exciting. I'm in favor of the short-term financing option. I think it gives us flexibility and we can always go back a year, 2 years later and pay that off. So I'm in favor of it for whatever that's worth.
I would agree with Andy on this one. I would be in favor of that short-term financing. It makes really good sense.
Any other thoughts?
So just to, I understand, so you're going to bring forward to, I guess it would be the Finance Committee, some policies related to these types of fundings moving forward. Did I hear you say that, Matt? Or did I not? He's looking at the sky, so
I might have said that I'd like to have that conversation, yeah, because I absolutely would like to kind of map out what this property acquisition focus would look like in terms of making our financial policies work with this new council goal, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because I think as we continue to do this type of work, looking at this as an asset and part of our financing pool, as we have discussed as a group, I think is a great way forward. And at a 1% interest rate, it seems incredibly logical that this would be a right thing to do at this point. But policy, I think it's wonderful that we're going to have that discussion and expand our opportunities there. So I thank you for that.
It seems the policy portion is kind of in place. It's just the decision of which policy we're most comfortable. I don't think we're looking at a policy change so much as we are of just we're continue to meet the policy and what's the best avenue to do that.
Yeah, I'm not proposing any policy changes at this time. I think there are kind of tentacles to this kind of behavior that impact, fund balance policies that we should have a more robust discussion. But at this point, it's just a decision on cash or short-term debt financing.
I would only add that I think it's likely that this is a parcel that we would hold on to, that I think that we will own for 20 years, maybe. Certainly all of that's always subject to change, but okay. Any other questions, comments? No, we will look forward to second reading on November the 15th then. Okay, Ordinance 81-21.
Adopting Chapter 140 under Title 13 of the City of Dublin Codified Ordinances to prohibit discrimination of certain protected classes.
Thank you. And we'll go back to Ms. Regler. Jennifer?
Good evening, members of council. I'd like to introduce Jesse Shamp from Frost Brown Todd. He's a colleague of mine, and he's going to present our findings on the non-discrimination legislation that's up for council consideration tonight.
Excellent meeting, members of council. Thank you, sir. Those prohibit discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. And just last year, the United States Supreme Court found that the term sex extends to sexual orientation and gender identity, at least in the employment context. In Ohio, the Ohio Revised Code prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, military status, national origin, disability, age, and ancestry in the employment context, and it also prohibits discrimination on the basis of familial status in the housing context. The draft legislation before you tonight adopts Chapter 140. It's sort of a two-part legislation. The first are the rules of conduct, and that prohibits discrimination in employment practices, housing practices, and public accommodations. And then the second part of the ordinance is the administrative procedure for complaints. Very briefly, the employment practices section prohibits any employer or labor organization from discriminating on the basis of a protected class. It is not on the slide, but the protected classes in the legislation tonight are race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, familial status, disability, pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. The ordinance also prohibits discrimination in activities related to employment, such as advertising or job recruiting. It does carve out exceptions for various statutory requirements, mandatory requirement age, hiring ages, legitimate requirements for the safety of the worker. and religious organizations, hiring individuals to advance the religious purpose of the organization. The housing practices section prohibits discrimination in selling, transferring, renting, or leasing housing based on a member's membership in a protected class. It also provides exceptions for reasonable occupancy standards, private fraternal organizations that operate lodging, direct threats to the health or safety of individuals, and housing specifically intended for senior citizens. Finally, the section on discrimination in public accommodations. This applies to owners, operators, managers, or employees of any place of public accommodation. That is defined fairly broadly to mean any restaurant, bar, hotel, motel, public transportation, or other place of public accommodation in the city. Our complaint procedure, sort of the second part of the ordinance before you, follows. We've reviewed several different jurisdictions around the state and the country. I think we've found upon a good formula here. It requires the party who is alleging discrimination to file a complaint with the clerk of courts. It includes all the relevant dates, parties, and circumstances. If it occurred within the past 6 months, it is referred to the law director and the city manager. And the law director will determine if the complaint alleges discrimination on a class already protected by state or federal law. So at the work session, we had that discussion. And so basically the new categories that are not expressly protected by federal and state law are the gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. Those will be handled at the city level. Others will likely be referred out to state or federal agencies. Step 2 is the investigation. If the law director determines it falls within our purview, we'll hire an outside counsel to perform an independent review. They'll do an interview with all of the parties. They can conduct investigations, issue subpoenas, hold mediations between the parties to hopefully come to an agreeable resolution. And then the outside counsel will provide a written determination to the law director. That will determine whether probable cause exists. The law director then reviews that with the city manager and determines whether to either dismiss the complaint or move forward to a hearing officer. If they decide to move forward, again, the city will contract with an independent hearing officer. They'll receive the complaint, all of the investigation materials, and the probable cause determination. They'll also set discovery rules, meet with all of the parties, and then issue findings of fact and conclusions of law at the end of any hearing. The hearing officer can dismiss the charge, issue a cease and desist order, or impose financial sanctions. We have imposed this schedule. The financial sanctions include a first offense of a fine not to exceed $1,000, a second offense within 5 years not to exceed $2,500, and a third offense not to exceed $5,000. And then, of course, any party can appeal the decision of that hearing officer to the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas.
Great, thank you, Mr. Shamp. Okay, we have some folks that have signed.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
This just occurred to me. If you know, a subpoena is only powerful except if it's enforced, right? So during the investigative phase, if a subpoena is issued and the people just ignore it, what court do you turn to enforce that subpoena at that point? Would it be in mayor's court? Would it be municipal court? Would it be common pleas court? Where would we go to enforce a subpoena?
It would be mayor's court, it'd be the city, so we're still under the city. And I believe in the draft legislation, we actually address that, the failure to comply with subpoenas.
Even at the investigative stage? And that ultimately becomes, if the court makes it a court order, you're in contempt of court. If you don't respond to that subpoena, the magistrate out there can lock that person up.
They could. We'll certainly address that. It would probably be a fine, but yes, it would be a contempt of court of the Dublin Mayor's Court.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we've had some folks sign up that wish to speak relative to this legislation, but I just wanted to let everyone know if you did not have opportunity to sign up prior to the meeting tonight, you still will have opportunity. So I'll take these 5 first, and then if anyone else would like to provide further comment, we'll do that subsequent. And we do try to limit public comments to 3 minutes if it's at all possible. We certainly don't want to be restrictive, but just want to be respectful of everyone's time this evening. So the first card I have here is for an Elena Yoakum. Sorry if I mispronounced her name. Welcome. If you could come forward and please state your name and address into the record, and we'd love to hear your comments.
Thank you so much for having me tonight, council members. Elena Jokum, and my address is at Equality, Ohio, 370 South 5th Street, Columbus, Ohio, 54321. Good evening. My name is Elena Jokum. I am an attorney and executive director for Equality Ohio, and I really have the pleasure of working with cities like Dublin across the state in improving their municipal protections for LGBTQ equality. I was just elated to learn that the city of Dublin, their community task force included such an ordinance as one of the priority goals for improving equity and inclusivity in Dublin. And I'm even more thrilled that the city is taking action and following up on what was presented in the community task force report. This will be a significant step towards progress in an already growing and thriving Dublin. It will also constitute positive change for Dublin with regard to its reputation for LGBTQ equality. Last year, as you may know, the Human Rights Campaign, which is a wonderful national organization, released a municipal equality scorecard. They rank several cities across our state. And unfortunately, in the area of non-discrimination protections, Dublin had 0 out of 30 points. And its overall score was 44 out of 100. By passing this legislation and ensuring explicit protections for your resident, you will improve that score significantly. And that will encourage people to stay, to move into Dublin. As a statewide equality organization, I cannot tell you how many people have anecdotally told us they will not take jobs into Ohio because of the lack of statewide protections. They will only move into communities that have these protections. It is the quiet conversations that we have within the community to know where people are going to be safe to transplant their families, to take new jobs. In the many years of experience, I've had the privilege of working to support cities in these ordinances. I have had the opportunity to identify what constitutes best practices for these ordinances. And the draft ordinance before you tonight comes very close to a fully inclusive non-discrimination ordinance. There are a few changes that I would like to recommend. I have actually brought copies of the changes here, and I would be happy to pass these if council members would like. I was able to give some of you beforehand, but if there's anybody else who would like a copy.
Legal has this. Is this part of what you distributed in the packet?
No, this is not. We received this tonight. I have a copy of it.
Okay.
But you may receive it.
Yep, okay, very good. I will briefly go through these. And as you said, the law director does have a copy of these, but essentially the definition of sex, although the definition provided here is used, it is not the best practice. The definition I would encourage would revise sex to mean male or female and actually envelop the pregnancy protections right there within the sex definition. That's how federal law looks at sex. I would also encourage a revised definition of public accommodations just in the tiniest of spaces. I would strike out the language of, I would strike out accommodations of a public education system, that it would not apply to a public education system. The reasoning for that is our public schools are almost always not public accommodations. They are serving their students. They are not something that the public can access at large. But in a few instances, they do become a public accommodation based on how they present themselves. Think a football game, or think a school play, something that maybe charges admissions. You would want your ordinance, in my estimation, to apply when it's acting in the public service of admitting people to an event, to also not be able to discriminate based on class protections in that event. For school functions and everything else, there's totally different law that governs that. School law, school board governs it. Just when it's acting as a public accommodation, this change would allow this ordinance to protect folks in that instance. Additionally, the religious exemption under employment, updating it to the standard language to match the state and federal law religious exemption. This appears to just have been a mere oversight. It's only a few words different, what I offer here versus what is in the ordinance right now. I would have it corrected to match the Ohio Revised Code at 4112.02. This again is a religious protection. It is allowing employers to prefer to hire those who are advancing their religious purposes, to have them be of the same religion of the religious organization. We just like them to match state and federal law explicitly, and this would bring that into alignment. And then finally, a word change under the unlawful discrimination employment section, and it would provide gender neutrality to provide who is protected for pregnancy-based discrimination. So changing it from woman to employee, this would also create internal consistency within that section of protections for pregnancy-based discrimination. Happy to answer any questions on those if there are specific questions. The other recommendation that I would make is to consider, right now you have a robust civil fine process. That is not the approach that every city chooses, and this will be a policy determination you have to make. That is a great thing to deter bad behavior. The person who is fined, let's assume that it is not resolved under mediation. We're thrilled that that is a first step. That's where 99% of these complaints get resolved. But if someone does go through the hearing process and is found to be in violation, that fine goes to the city. It doesn't actually help the person who experienced the discrimination. They are not made whole in any way. So a consideration would be to look to other cities that have given their hearing officers some power to make the plaintiff, if you will, whole. Akron and Lakewood have provided their hearing officers or their hearing ordinance committees some ability to provide some remedy to the person who is aggrieved. I'll just end to say that it's 2021, and it is hard to believe that here we are with marriage equality. We can marry the person we love in the state of Ohio and across our country, and yet you can still generally be fired or denied housing or denied service in public spaces simply for who you are or whom you love. At Equality Ohio, we are working so hard at the state level to fix this through the Ohio Fairness Act and through the Equality Act at the federal level. But we have not gotten there yet. We improve every single year. We will pass it this year in the General Assembly, I hope. But until then, it is up to cities and municipalities like yours to protect your own residents and make them attractive so that your community wants to attract and retain the best and brightest talent, including those in our LGBTQ community. I commend you for this step tonight. I hope you can make these minor changes, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Jochum. Appreciate your thoughts. Next up, we have, we'll save our discussion for after all the public comment has been received. Next up, we have Peggy Kilty.
Good evening. My name is Peggy Kilty. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I reside at 7568 Ashlord Court here in Dublin, Ohio. I am a proud parent of an openly gay teenager, and I am a board member for the nonprofit community alliance Rainbow Dublin. This is not the first time I have come here to speak to you and advocate for the LGBTQ+ community, and I do not think it will be my last. We are entering a time of year when many of us begin to reflect on what has excited and inspired us, as well as review lessons learned from our failures and accomplishments. It is also a time of year when we reflect on the importance of gratitude. This city council and the many committees that support the council's work have a substantial number of accomplishments to be proud of this past year. The ongoing successful development and connection of Old Dublin to New Dublin is just one example of all completed with the vision of the city's future in mind. And this past year, I've been excited to watch the work and progress made by the Police Chiefs Advisory Committee and by the Community Task Force. And this past year, I have been inspired by the community support and activism of my Rainbow Dublin colleagues and the good people at Equality Ohio. Thank you. And this evening, I wish to express my gratitude to everyone who has advocated for and worked to initiate a non-discrimination ordinance in the city of Dublin. I'm thankful for the efforts that brought us here for tonight's first reading of Ordinance 8121, which will ultimately prohibit the discrimination of LGBTQ+ people in terms of housing, employment, and public accommodations here in Dublin, Ohio. In terms of the lessons I've learned and with my own successes and failures, not only in the past year, but in the past 3 years since my child has come out, the one thing that stands out is learning the impact of discrimination that my child or my family has experienced since they came out. Discrimination is ugly, it is unkind, and it is unjust, and it is painful. Like all of you, I also have a vision of this city's future in mind, and I want to live in a city that truly welcomes everyone. I want to live in a city where the truth is reflected and enforced through inclusive public policy. Lastly, I'll share with all of you that every Thanksgiving we have a tradition in my family, and many of you might have the same tradition, where we go around the table and we talk about the things and reflect on and express gratitude for something that has transpired in this past year. And I would love nothing more this coming holiday to be able to tell my family that I am thankful for a new non-discrimination ordinance that is fully backed by Equality Ohio here in the city of Dublin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kilty. Next, we have Jaron Terry.
Hi, I'm Jaron Terry. So good evening. I'm addressing you tonight as the mother of a member of the LGBTQ community, as president of the board of directors of PFLAG Columbus, and as a member of Rainbow Dublin's board. I'm here to voice my and my husband's support for the non-discrimination ordinance and to say thank you to Dublin City Council for having established the Community Task Force in August 2020, which is the genesis for the non-discrimination ordinance that has had its first reading tonight. I want to thank the Community Task Force members for their work in creating the diversity, equity, and inclusion framework that spells out in community building and inclusion that support for the LGBTQ+ community can be realized through action steps that include this indicator of success. Quote, City Council passes a non-discrimination ordinance that protects LGBTQ people from employment, housing, and public accommodation discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender expression/identity. In particular, I want to thank those tasked with creation of the non-discrimination ordinance for reaching out to and working closely with Equality Ohio to ensure that our city has an NDO that meets or exceeds the criteria and standards spelled out by Equality Ohio. And of course, I also thank Equality Ohio for their tireless efforts across the state as well as here in Dublin. In summary, PFLAG Columbus supports the City of Dublin passing the non-discrimination ordinance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Terry. Next, we have Bobby Weston.
Hello. My name is Bobby Weston. I reside at 3247 Rossbury Court, and I am the founder and I am now the newly elected president of the board of directors for Rainbow Dublin. First, I want to thank the Dublin City Council for allowing this dialogue. I'm a fervent supporter of Ordinance 8121 because it would provide protection from discrimination based on national origin, race, religion, age, disability, and now to add to that list, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. This non-discrimination ordinance is an amazing first step in bringing Dublin up to date with many of our neighboring communities. Secondly, I stand here today in full support of all the recommended changes that Equality Ohio has placed before you. If those changes are accepted, it is my understanding that Equality Ohio is prepared to accept Dublin's ordinance as fully comprehensive. Multiple cities in Ohio and across the United States have passed non-discrimination ordinances, and I'm excited that Dublin aims to be among them. I believe that we must do our best to make sure that Dublin stands for fairness, parity, and success by setting the bar as high as possible. After all, that's kind of what we're known for here. So I urge you to refer Ordinance 8121 back to the Dublin Law Director to make the necessary changes brought before you today by Equality Ohio to help ensure that our non-discrimination order can be fully comprehensive to the quality principles set forth by Equality Ohio. It is vital that Dublin City Council make these alterations to set ourselves as a front runner among the cities of Ohio and to illustrate just exactly why Dublin is one of the best cities to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your thoughts. Okay, finally, we have Michael Haynes. Please step forward and state your name and address into the record.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Michael Haynes. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I live at 5329 Ross Common here in Dublin. And I want to start by thanking you all for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'm here tonight as a Dublin resident, as a Dublin parent, and as the vice president of Rainbow Dublin's board of directors. And I'm here to encourage City Council to adopt for the benefit of our city the non-discrimination ordinance which is being read tonight. So I'd like to thank council and everyone who's been involved so far in the drafting of this ordinance and bringing it to this point. When people are in our city, they should be comfortable in the knowledge that they are welcome and that they are valued regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or their gender expression. It was really great to see the Dublin link lit up in rainbow colors for Pride back in June. Being part of the city's first Pride celebration, seeing the turnout for it and feeling the energy around it, that was really inspiring and moving. And you know, I've lived in Dublin for quite a few years now, but that's one of the highlights of my time here in Dublin. So it's great to see legislative action being taken as well to help support the LGBTQ+ community. This NDO is an important step in letting members of our community know that the city recognizes and supports them as they live, work, recreate, and do business in our city. I look forward to the passage of this NDO for the benefit of our city as a whole. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haynes. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? That concludes all of the cards that I have, but I think Sandy would like to come forward. Please come forward, state your name and address into the record.
My name is Sandra Anderson. I live at 7677 Riverside Drive, Dublin, right on the river, right next to Chris's uncle and aunt. I'm here with my wife, Lynn Reedy, and it hasn't been too many years that I have been able to say that I live here in Dublin, Ohio with my wife. And I'm proud to be a member of the community here. I serve on the Dublin Arts Council, and once upon a time I was the chair of the Equality Ohio Board. I am so proud of Elena Jochum and all of the staff at Equality Ohio for the social justice, the civil rights that they have gained for the LGBTQ community in the state of Ohio. And we've had to do it, I still say we, Equality Ohio has had to do it one city at a time as we continue to fight at the state level for recognition of our civil rights. But meanwhile, we've had to do it one city at a time. And I will be so proud when my hometown of Dublin, Ohio adds its name to the list of cities that say, no discrimination here, all are welcome. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to speak relative to this legislation this evening? Okay, hearing none. Council discussion?
As I listen to all of you, and I'm thrilled that we're doing what we need to do to create a city that's welcoming for everyone, I have to think to myself, I hope it doesn't take this long, but sometimes my grandchildren ask me, Mom, are you serious? Women couldn't vote? Mom, really? They wouldn't allow a black child to attend a white school? And ordinances were set back then. And it changed minds and hearts over a period of time. I hope it doesn't take that long to change minds and hearts, but it is a beginning. And I think that we all in our hearts, whether we write an ordinance or not, would hope that we could accept each other for just who we are, right? And that we didn't need policies and we didn't need ordinances to do it. So for those who may not agree with this ordinance, I would just say, open your minds and hearts to people. There's room enough on this world for every one of us. So I'm happy for all of you. I'm proud of this council, and I hope that as we go forward, we do it hand in hand.
Thank you, Jane. Other thoughts? No? Oh.
Thank you all for coming this evening and for your perseverance and your hard work and your determination, and we thank you. I will turn to, I guess, our colleagues and ask, and maybe not for discussion this evening, I don't know, you've had time to reflect on this, but would like a review to see which of these changes.
And actually, we've reviewed the list, the 4 items that they have, that Equality Ohio provided to us, and we have no objections to any of those revisions. And so we're happy to make those modifications. We would recommend sticking with the complaint procedure that we have. I know there are 2 municipalities that were pointed out that have some different provisions, but we feel we should stay consistent with what we have in the majority of ordinances that we've reviewed as far as enforcement.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank our community task force for the hard work that they have done on this. I'd like to thank our community members for coming up and being passionate about your thoughts, and we're certainly welcome to those. I would only add, I've seen in some the term birth parent be used rather than a gender specific or even some other name relative to pregnancy, and that seems to be a term that works out well in that space. Kind of takes some of the identity out of it, and it's just the birth parent. So I might recommend, if that would be acceptable to you all, that would be a term we would use. And Sandy, it's fun to watch that celebration. It's been a long journey, and I've known you and Lynn both for many years, and so thank you for having a long track record for fighting for this equality for people that weren't represented in our community. So we appreciate that. With that, I don't know that we have anything further. We have second reading on November the 15th, and we will take the time between now and then that incorporate these changes, and we'll vote on it on that evening. So thank you all for your participation. And that will bring us to Ordinance 82-21.
Rezoning approximately 42.5 acres from R Rural District to PUD Planned Unit Development District, Highland Glen, for development of 102 single-family lots with 12.4 acres of open space and associated site improvements on the east side of Highland Croy Road, north of the intersection of Post Road, under the provisions of Zoning Code Section 153.050.
Thank you. And as intriguing as the balance of this council meeting is going to be, you're welcome to go ahead and exit. If your passion isn't land use matters. Thank you. Okay, our staff report will be from Ms. Martin. Welcome, Nikki.
Great. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. As mentioned, this is a proposal as an introduction for a rezoning and preliminary development plan for Highland Glen. This is a site that has previously been before you in another form. The site is located northeast of the intersection of Highland Croy Road and Post Road, near the intersection with US 33 and State Route 161 interchange. The site is surrounded by existing established single-family neighborhoods and is presently comprised of 2 parcels. As council may recall, this property was originally annexed into the city in 2018. And most recently, council reviewed a request for rezoning in December of 2020, at which point council disapproved the rezoning request, finding that it was inconsistent with the community plan, as well as the criteria set forth in the zoning code. Planning and Zoning Commission is recommending approval of this ordinance at the second reading on November 15th to City Council. As with any development application, it is imperative to consider the community plan when land use recommendations are under consideration. This is a proposal for 102 single-family dwellings at a density of 2.4 dwelling units to the acre, also providing 12.4 acres of open space. The future land use recommendation for this site is comprised of 2 different land uses: suburban residential low density, which is traditional to Dublin and calls for a density of up to 2 dwelling units to the acre, as well as mixed residential low density, which is intended to transition as you move toward the interchange. The combined recommendation for this site is up to 113 lots, which is consistent with the proposal before you this evening. Additionally, the community plan includes the Thoroughfare Plan. It's important to highlight here that Highland Croy Road is within the jurisdiction of Union County and under the purview of the Union County engineer. The Thoroughfare Plan includes recommended right-of-way widths, which for Highland Croy is 100 feet. This application is providing the additional right-of-way width necessary in order to facilitate development. Additionally, the plan contains character recommendations. This plan provides a rural roadway character, as well as completes the bicycle and pedestrian connectivity from Post Road all the way north on Highland Croy to McKittrick. As part of a rezoning, a traffic impact study is required to be submitted. The TIS for this proposal has been substantively accepted by both the City of Dublin as well as the Union County engineer, who have reviewed it jointly. Additional information regarding traffic impacts as well as mitigation will be covered in Ordinance 8321. Finally, the community plan includes special area plans where additional detail is conceptually provided in key locations throughout the city. The general recommendations for this site include sensitivity to existing single-family neighborhoods, as well as an opportunity to provide a transition as you move south and west. The design recommendations are as identified on the screen. The community plan also includes mobility recommendations as well as open space recommendations. So in consideration of the community plan, the development proposal before you this evening is as depicted on the screen. Here you can see the proposal is to be developed in 3 sections. Section 1 being centrally located, containing 40 lots. The site has 3 proposed access points along Highland Croy Road, as well as extends existing stubs from Post Preserve to the west. 6 reserves of open space are proposed, which are depicted here on the screen, as well as the extension of ML Red Tribune Nature Preserve around the South Fork of the Indian Run. The rezoning establishes a development text where zoning standards are set forth. This development, in order to be sensitive to the surrounding established character, provides development requirements for both interior lots as well as perimeter lots. The perimeter lots are intended to match the neighborhoods to the north and east, while the interior lots provide a transition as you move toward the interchange. Single-family homes, parks, model homes, as well as home occupation are permitted, and the setbacks vary based on whether it's an interior or perimeter lot. It's important to note that as part of Planning and Zoning Commission's review, an additional minimum distance between structures was established of 12 feet, and in no case are patios permitted to encroach a side or rear yard setback. The proposed building materials and conceptual architectural styles are also provided to the council. Architecture was an item of discussion when the previous rezoning proposal was before you. This provides enough architectural detail to meet the diversity requirements in the development text, as well as providing designs and materials consistent with the quality of Dublin. On the screen is a stormwater open space and connectivity plan. As mentioned, this provides connectivity to the region as well as internal to the site, as well as manages stormwater on site. 3 stormwater management basins are proposed, one located in the Gateway Reserve A at the intersection of Post and Highland Croy, and 2 located within the extension of Red Tribune. Highlighted here in purple is the Gateway Reserve. This will be further detailed in forthcoming slides, but this area is to be owned and maintained by the city and will be part of a future CIP project that will be designed and programmed. So in detail, Reserve A is shown on the screen in relation to the future interchange modifications. This is intended to provide council context regarding the configuration of the new off-ramp, as well as the modifications to the intersection of Highland Croy and Post Road, specifically the proximity to the Gateway Reserve and the opportunity that this area provides the community to both remember Dublin's past as well as highlight our future. So Reserve A contains a number of structures. The farmstead was evaluated as part of the city's historic and cultural assessment in 2017 and contains 9 buildings. Shown here on the screen is the limit of Reserve A in green, as well as structures A through H, the conceptual stormwater management basin, and finally the interchange improvements. Before council this evening, there are 4 structures that are in conflict with the proposed stormwater plan. Staff is recommending these to be removed as depicted in the preliminary development plan. Additionally, staff is recommending structures B and H, the barn and the granary, to be preserved. And finally is recommending structures A and I, the farmhouse and the cellar, to be removed, which are further detailed in the memo. In detail, the structures are provided here on the screen. You can see the farmhouse built in the early 1900s with subsequent modifications in the 1930s, 1950s, and some thereafter. You can see here the modifications over time, although while this is designated as contributing to the National Register, it has modifications including vinyl siding, storm windows, awnings, asphalt shingles, and other elements that are not traditional to its original character. To the rear of the farmhouse is the cellar. The cellar is not recommended contributing unless the entire farmstead is retained. It does provide a relationship between the home and the outbuilding. The granary is sited along Post Road, and you'll notice is on access with the barn, which is located immediately to the north of the granary, identified here as H. The relationship between structures is one of the most valuable elements of the historic farmstead. In addition to recommending preservation of the granary, staff is also recommending preservation of the barn. This is consistent with other previous development proposals within the city of Dublin. This barn is unique as it dates to the early 1900s, as well as has a specific construction type with sawtooth details. Also depicted on the screen are structures that are in conflict with the stormwater management basin, requiring council's determination this evening. In the upper left-hand corner is the milk house. This is a cinder block structure that requires repair as well as is not recommended contributing individually. The milk parlor is located immediately to the right of the barn with a shed roof addition. You can see here that it's deteriorated as well as has a hole in the roof. And then the independent appendage to the barn structure, which is a much later addition, possibly dating to the 1970s, is the cow shed. This is structurally independent and in poor condition. Finally, structures F and G, shown on the bottom of the page, are proposed to be removed. This is a steer shed as well as a tool shed constructed contemporary to some of the older structures as well as much later. These structures are either not of any historic value or greatly deteriorated. In consideration of all the structures, staff identified resources as well as precedents to consider, namely those listed on the screen. Staff is recommending preservation of the barn and granary due to the relationship between structures and is asking council to affirm the demolition of structures in conflict with the stormwater management basin, as that is a key element of the preliminary development plan further identified in the infrastructure agreement. Finally, this was reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, recommended approval with 10 conditions to council at the second reading public hearing on November 15th. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the applicant team is here as well this evening. Thank you.
Can you go back to the 10 recommendations by the Planning and Zoning Commission?
Yeah, so 1 through 6 were original and 7 through 10 were additions made by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Excuse me, can you go back to 1 through 5? Okay, I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to make a comment relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion?
I would just like to have a conversation concerning, I guess, one, the historic properties, which I understand, you know, there are some in bad condition. Was the stormwater basin had any other configuration possible other than the one we have?
So staff and the applicant did explore a variety of configurations for the stormwater management basin. This location is particularly critical as it is the lowest point on the site. This configuration is also revised from the initial proposal and accommodates the preservation of 2 structures where the applicant was initially proposing preservation of only the barn.
Well, one of the things that I just want to be clear to council, I did vote no on this partially because of the historic structures, but not necessarily because I felt that we as a city need to own them and preserve them, because I don't think we can own and preserve every historic structure in the city. But I do think that in fairness to others who do own historic structures in the city and are required to show criteria for demolition and walk the path through that, I didn't see that happening with the city in demolishing these. They were just considered useless and in the way, and therefore were required to be demolished, whereas others have to abide by a set of like 4 different criteria. And so I'm just stating that I feel that that's not fair, that the city is allowed to demolish historic structures that are pointed out in the community plan by address to be preserved, and then not being able to show to planning and zoning the criteria to demolish them. And then the second concern I have about this particular, it's not this particular, I guess, development, because it has been okayed by planning and zoning. But I bring to your attention the density and the requirement to push to try to get these setbacks a little bit wider. And if these properties are at a lot size on an average of 6,600 square foot, and the buildable area is 4,620, and you then take away the front setback of 1,200 square foot, and the rear setback of 600 square foot, and then the side setbacks along the sides of 1,320, you leave yourself 60 square foot for patio. And so that's when we said you can't put a patio in the setback because there's no space for a patio. So, you know, we had this conversation at planning and zoning, and I think that, and you'll see this later on in the conversation, that planning and zoning is reviewing residential standards. But if we don't have a maximum square footage on a house size, you're going to get lot coverage that is very, very tight. And then when people want to put in an outdoor patio space, they're not going to appreciate that there's just no room left over. So you know, these are the concerns that I had, and I think some other members of the commission had, and I just want to bring to your attention for discussion.
Great, thanks, Jane. Andy?
Nikki, is the farmhouse contributing, historical contributing?
So the historic and cultural assessment evaluated only the house. That was found to be contributing, but recommended for the larger complex to be retained with it. Our historic preservation consultant, Preservation Designs, which provided a memo attached to your packet, evaluated each structure individually and as a group. The 2 that are eligible individually are the home and the barn. The remainder of the structures are only eligible as a group, and the tool shed is not historically eligible or contributing at all.
So I'm just kind of piggybacking on what Jane was saying. I think it's unfair that the city could demolish a structure that a resident couldn't. I guess in looking at the farmhouse, I sort of question its historical value relative to some of the other historic structures around the city. So that's just my uninformed opinion. The barn, however, appears to be in very good shape, clearly historic, so I'd be in favor of keeping that. But the farmhouse, I guess I would want to substantiate our ability to demolish it held to the same standard that a resident would be.
Thanks, Andy. Other thoughts? Yeah, Kathy?
I had a couple questions not related to the historical side of it. If you could pull back up the schematic that you had. So the entranceways along Highland Croy, there is the Stillhouse Lane, and then there is Moorland Drive, I guess is the name of it. A couple questions. So do I understand that there will be a stop light, or what is the egress, ingress on those 2 particular entries into the development? So on Stillhouse, is that a right in, right out only, or?
That's correct. Yeah, so Stillhouse is a write-in, write-out only. And then the other two access points are full movement. And
What does full movement mean?
it means that you could make a right or a left out of it.
Okay.
And if you wanted to use a traffic light, the Park Place to the north.
So is there a traffic light proposed at Moorland Drive?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. All right, I think, I appreciate that because I know with the interchange coming in, making that first one right in, right out, and the stoplight, I think adds a real degree of safety there that I think is going to be important. Then the language that I read suggested that all three of these access points would be open simultaneously. Is the building of this going to be done simultaneously, or is it going to be done in phases? And I mean, this question has come to me a few times from residents just about traffic flow. If you could share information on that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So the phasing shown on your screen is specifically related to development phasing and is not related to infrastructure phasing. So in the infrastructure agreement, there's further detail regarding the construction of these various access points. And it is my understanding that they will be open in coordination with one another.
In coordination, so at the same time?
Correct.
Okay, I think that was a important point. And then, just one more. And then on the entryway features on, the three different entry points, I know in previous work with the residents, there was a lot of input into design of some of those entryways in terms of plantings and things like that. I know this is a different design than some of the previous designs that have been put in here. But I'm hopeful that some of the recommendations from residents as to the aesthetics around that have been incorporated in this. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so this is a preliminary development plan. So we've conceptually set the framework to allow for that design detail to happen at the final development plan. And I would anticipate that to absolutely occur in accordance with the community plan.
Great, thank you very much.
Other questions, Council? John?
My problem with the project is, outdoor living space and the tightness of the units. I mean, the density of this doesn't seem to add a lot to the quality of the life of the new residents, and I am concerned about that. Another concern I have is the idea that the city's taken over the maintenance of all this, the common area, which I personally, as a taxpayer, think should be done by the homeowners association. I don't know why we'd be assuming that, but as we will probably have to end up taking care of the water features. So same problem I think I had with it the last time I looked at this thing, and people really are seeking outdoor spaces, and this thing, the overall design of this, what comes to my mind is ticky-tacky houses all in a row, and not that they are. I mean, the architecture is sort of interesting and somewhat well done, but pedestrian path owned and maintained by the city, I don't know if I really want to venture into that. So I have some, my problems with just the general layout and the density of the project.
Other thoughts, questions from council? I would echo John's concerns about the maintenance of the ponds and much of the green space. I don't know. This is something we've talked about again and again. I just fundamentally disagree that we should take care of ponds now. We're either going to take care of every pond in the city or we're not. I haven't seen anything in the budget that led me to believe that we could if we wanted to without some significant sacrifices in other areas. So I'm not supportive of that. I would like to see us navigate the process for the demolition of the house. I agree with Andy. I don't know that that we couldn't meet that threshold, but I think it's important to hold ourselves to the same standard as we would hold any other resident. And maybe we can, provide that if there are elements on the interior portion of the house that maybe some reclamation kind of group could come in and salvage those for someone who was trying to restore a similarly period home. But I'd prefer to not just see all of that stuff go in the dump. With that, and then what are we going to do when these people that live here sell their house the first time and the second people move in and they want an outdoor space? What is it that what are we going to say when they come and say, I live in Dublin, I can't eat a burger outside of my house? Like, really? Because we know they're going to. We've seen the same thing happen at Oak Park, right? So what are we going to say?
Can you repeat that?
So on these 60-foot lots, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, the 60-foot lots that have the 5-foot setbacks, that have essentially they can have a 6x10 outdoor patio, which would need to house a table and a grill and some other chairs and whatever. It's just not enough space to have any meaningful outdoor areas. And so what are we going to tell them when they come, when the second owner buys the house, right? The first person's going to know what they signed up for, right? And then the second person's going to say, oh, well, we really love this house. We'll just put a patio on. We'll go ahead and buy it. And then they're going to come to BZA like we've seen in Oak Park, and they're going to say, I just want to eat a burger on my back patio on a beautiful May evening. And I can't do that here in the city of Dublin. What are we going to tell them when the ARB or some chamber fills up with those people that are dissatisfied? I just think we need to answer that question now so we're not surprised when it happens.
I guess 2 points of clarification that I'd like to provide. First and foremost, in regards to demolition of historic structures, this farmstead is not protected under Appendix G, which is the outlying list of historic properties. Which means that it would not be subject to the Architectural Review Board or the demolition criteria set forth in the code. That being said, staff did hear loud and clear that council would like us to evaluate this against the criteria for demolition, which was contemplated as part of your memo. The demolition criteria set forth in the Architectural Review Board code predominantly relate to the economic return on the property, right? As a municipality, should we choose to preserve it, we would not be looking for a return on our investment, making many of the criteria invalid or not applicable. So just to keep that in mind. The other item regarding patios, you are more than correct. This is something that we have discussed time and time again, and it is something that the Planning and Zoning Commission deliberated on. Across the city, we do provide an allowance for patios to encroach up to 5 feet into a setback. The Planning and Zoning Commission elected to make a recommendation to City Council to not permit that encroachment. That being said, these are still much more intense lots as you move toward the interchange.
Really, it's a quality of life issue for the people who are going to live in these units. I mean, if you think a 6-foot patio, you get guests over and you start laying out patios for people to enjoy, and there's 4 people, you table for 4 people, and the other accessories, the grill and whatever. And this really doesn't work from a design standpoint. It's just way too dense for what's happening. The other thing I thought is, I thought we were getting to the point where these kind of green spaces in these subdivisions would be taken over by the HOA, and the city would be out of them. And in this thing, I see the city totally involved. And what happens to the barn then? I mean, who maintains it? Who keeps it? What's its function? I mean, barns are American castles. I appreciate that aspect of, what we have in Ohio, and I like that. But, are we going to maintain this forever? Or,
So I think this is an exceptionally unique site in the city, right? This is the western gateway to Dublin, and it is also the southern gateway to the Highland Croy Road corridor. And preserving these structures is of the utmost importance, or some of them, to maintain that rural roadway character and to acknowledge our past. In terms of ownership and maintenance, it's consistent practice that the city does own all reserves of open space. That requires the city to cover the property tax associated with that space, and it is actually deeded to the city as publicly accessible, so anyone, anywhere in the city may access it. In regards to maintenance, the only items that are proposed to be maintained by the city are the Gateway Reserve, located in Reserve A, and then the stormwater appurtenances, which are in the stormwater management basins in A, D, and E. It would be the intent that all of the open spaces, excluding the Gateway Reserve A, would be fully maintained, excluding stormwater, by the HOA.
Is this a fully funded homeowners association?
Yes, it is forced and funded, and the applicant did provide a pro forma for open space new maintenance for council's consideration.
Will they be part of post-preserve or independent?
They will be independent.
And was there conversation about combining them with post-preserve? It seems there would be some economies of scale, perhaps.
That was contemplated. Ultimately, in practice, we've found that each neighborhood has a distinct character, and differentiating that is often preferred. And so were it incorporated into the post-preserve HOA, it would likely be fully incorporated into the post-preserve neighborhood, and therefore would potentially be changing the front door to their neighborhood.
Other thoughts? Jane? Kathy?
Is there a possibility well, a couple of things when it comes to the historic structure. One of the things that I am concerned about is if you know, the demolition of some of these structures is anticipated, is it possible that we could, as Chris mentioned, maybe sell it to someone? It could be moved. I mean, if it hadn't been pointed out in the community plan as a preservable, a rural historic development, it probably wouldn't be so important. But the community plan did point them out. And then secondly, as I look at the retention basin if we're going to have a retention basin, this needs to be something that actually is usable space, so that it is incorporated into this landscape, so that it feels as if it has potential for someone that would even want to go around it, instead of simply taking a large retention basement, putting a couple of buildings on the side of it and calling it a day. I mean, I look at Muirfield and some of the ways some of the beautiful basins were designed so that they were actually an amenity. If it's a gateway, I think those are important elements. And I think that's why I'm kind of so interested in these historic structures. If it's a gateway, then it should be a very pretty rural gateway. And then I am still very concerned about the lot coverage. So I don't know where we go with that, but I don't want to box ourselves into a place where we just absolutely have angry residents about outdoor space.
I think with the Reserve A, with the preservation of the two structures there, I think it will maintain kind of a rural gateway feel. I think that could be a really lovely, Reserve A could be a lovely place to spend time, and certainly to drive by on Post Road. So I hear you on the house. For me, it's about practice more than it is about the house. I'm not terribly tied to that house. I think the value is in the two structures that are being preserved, and I'm comfortable with that feeling, having a nice rural feel. You know, And then the other thing I'm not sure about, so on this little loop here, you have 4 street names. You have Stillhouse Lane that becomes Barnsdale Drive. Oh, now I can't see them. And then you have Gordon that becomes Banshee Drive. Can you explain to me why that 20 houses will be on Gordon Drive and the next 20 will be on Banshee that are really all on the same street?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is in coordination with the U.S. Post Office and wanting to ensure that these are all unique addresses and that odd and even numbered addresses are not on opposite sides of the same loop. So this is in coordination with engineering fulfilling that request.
So Gordon Drive couldn't run all the way down? You couldn't have enough house numbers for all, I'm going to guess, 40 homes that are on that street?
You certainly could, but it would require a suffix, like a direction. So there would be a south and a north portion, which can be problematic for addressing as well as fire and EMS service.
You will see that same configuration, very short streets further up on Highland Croy and some of those developments, this patterns what exists there now in some of those loops. Yeah, very short.
It's funny that on Woolly Drive, on the other one, it's on one side, it's Woolly Drive, and then it's Wild Drive on the other side that only will have 5 homes on it.
And you'll see that again in some of the developments further up. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I do have a bit of an issue with the size of the lot and the lack of the ability to have really an outdoor space. I think that's going to be a problem in the future. I agree with Chris about the barn, and I think having those 2 structures, if it's done really well, will maintain that very sort of pretty rural area. I don't think we've ever really come to a conclusion on whether or not we should be maintaining all of the ponds in the city. Like, that's been a struggle for us. You know, I looked at the pro forma. I don't know that I would call this a pro forma. It's a sort of, this is what we think it's gonna cost us maybe annually, but there's no accommodation for time value of money or out in the future, because I promise you, your insurance might be $2,500 the first year, but it sure isn't going to be $2,500 5 years after that, right? So what I would much prefer to see is a pro forma that takes into account out years. That just makes more sense to me. And whether you tie that to the value of the home or you tie that to some type of inflationary index, you know, whatever. But this is really just a 1-year cost snapshot in time, not a pro forma. This is something I've talked about since I've been on council. I think these should be required, and they should be required in a way that takes into account the value of money over time, including long-term asset management where there needs to be long-term asset management. In this case, it's a relatively simple, we're not talking about big structures and things like that. In other cases, we have been. But I do struggle with the lot coverage is really the issue here. Because people do want outdoor space. And while people moving in initially might be like, yeah, I'm cool with it, you're going to have problems with people encroaching because they're going to build first and ask for forgiveness later. And we've seen that happen. And we've seen how painful it is for folks to have to tear down the thing that they built. Now, they should have followed the instructions, right? But they're like, this is my property. I want to have an outdoor space. So that's my concern, is it's really in thinking about how future people will look at their property and think how they want to use it. You know, and I do struggle with the ponds. You know, I don't think we need to maintain every single pond, so that's a bit of a struggle for me too. Like, I'm fine with the shared use path. It's providing connectivity to the other shared use paths that we maintain anyway, so I feel very comfortable with that. And again, I'm not necessarily afraid of density. I'm afraid of the lot coverage, which gives it that more intense feel, and the lack of ability to have sort of that future outdoor use. So those are my concerns. And I think the street name thing is funny. Don't they have to have a mailbox block anyway? So why does the Postal Service care whether the odds are on one side and the evens are the other? They don't have to drive up and down those streets. I'm just saying.
Thanks. Kathy, did you have final comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments. I mean, we've continued planning and zoning, and we've continued to have the discussions about side setbacks, about patios, and about storm. Every single one of these that comes before us, and in my opinion, this is now on us. We have got to, if this is something that we're concerned about, we have got to address this. And I know planning and zoning has started to have that conversation. We're going to continue to see this in every development that we're going to have before us if we don't address that. And so I encourage us to do both of those things. I will add this, that the density of this is half of what it was before. And I can also share that I've spoken with a few residents. I can't say many, because I can tell you when residents are unhappy, we hear, and when they're happy, we don't. But they're pleased with a couple things. They're pleased with the size lot comparison back to their homes. And they're really excited that the barn is going to be preserved. They're really happy that that gateway is going to be there. So I can share the feedback that I have received from residents, because I've had conversations since I think 17 when this piece of property came. And I would say, overall, the residents are pleased with this and pleased with the openings and some of the work that staff has done, and pleased with staff's efforts to continue to do work down Highland Croy to make that a safer, better thoroughfare. And so I wanted to share what I have been hearing from residents on this. Thank you.
Thanks. Nikki, maybe prior to second reading, you could come back with some modeling of what the outdoor space would be, particularly, I think, on lots, 2 through 20, less 10 and 11, and 45 through 55, and maybe just some modeling of what outdoor space would look like, because those seem to be the tightest of the bunch, and just do some, modeling of what a house layout would look like and what would be available for a patio space. And then we can finish that conversation on the 15th for second reading.
I just want to point out one on the highlight. Mr. Ruma as a developer went out of his way to be sure that the lots adjacent to the neighborhoods were larger, were more comparable to what they butted up against in the abutting residential. And so, even though we're talking about density and some of this lot coverage, we need to lift up the fact that you did go out of your way to be sure that that coverage was different. I think my biggest concern are those interior lots that has such intense coverage and such tight setbacks and no allowance for patios. But other than that, the density per acre, unit per acre, is within the normal ranges. It is a beautiful architectural style, and so there's lots about this development that is very, very nice. It's just some of this lot coverage on those interior lots are just really don't allow patio space.
Yep, and I think if we do some modeling and understand what the opportunity is, we'll have a better understanding of that. Of maybe we could limit square footage on the homes of those lots, or maybe we could do a couple things that made for some outdoor space available to them. So is that an okay direction for our second meeting on the 15th?
So we can definitely provide you more information at the second reading. That is, of course, no problem. I think the real question is how quickly we can produce the information, because obviously we want it to be comprehensive and complete and correct. So,
well, we could give you latitude on the 15th. The second reading wouldn't have to be on the 15th. It could be on, I believe our following meeting is on the 6th, I believe, of December. And it could be at that point in time, if the 15th timeframe is too tight.
Yeah, the 1 week turnaround is going to be a challenge, but but as long as everyone knows we need a little extra time. I guess the applicant knows we have another council meeting as soon as next Monday, just because of the holiday, and then we'll.
But we're happy to give the extension to December 6th. There's nothing magical about the 15th, just because it says that on the agenda. We're happy to move that to the 6th if that gives you more time to make those analyses and representations. So we asked staff to model for us what the outdoor space would be on those lots 2 to 9 and 11 to 20, I think, whatever. Maybe those would have some restrictions on the usage of the lot for the home. Maybe not, but we'd like some modeling on what outdoor space would be available on the smallest of the lots, just so that we have a clear understanding of what would be available should someone choose to build in there. And then we can have a more meaningful conversation at second hearing.
So you need materials tomorrow for the meeting next?
Well, the second half of that discussion is we have another meeting on December the 6th. So we could move your second reading to December the 6th to give you ample time to make those determinations and then still be finished before the end of the year if all went well. Thank you, Mr. Ruma. Good to see you. Okay, are you all right with that, Nikki and staff? Megan? Okay, great. Well, we will likely see you back then on December the 6th for second reading. Okay, Ordinance 83-21.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an infrastructure agreement with Paragon Building Group Limited in Union County for the Highland Glen development.
Good, thank you. And our staff report will be from Megan O'Callahan.
Good evening, members of council. Ordinance 8321 is a proposed infrastructure agreement with Paragon Building Group Limited and Union County for the Highland Glen development. It is a companion legislation to Ordinance 8221 that you were just considering. Execution of an infrastructure agreement is a condition of approval recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission for the rezoning and preliminary development plan. And for purposes of background, and as council is aware, the upcoming reconstruction of the State Route 161 Post Road interchange will influence the future of the existing Post Preserve Boulevard entrance at Post Road. And recent discussions with ODOT have determined that that entrance will be restricted in the future to right-in, right-out movements once the interchange is upgraded. And this restriction still maintains the need to provide alternate access over to Post Preserve from Highland Croy. So regardless of the proposed rezoning before you or in the future, the city would still need to facilitate such connectivity to Highland Croy as we have been budgeting to do so in conjunction with the interchange design process. The proposed development provides an opportunity to accomplish this connection in partnership, and therefore we are proposing this infrastructure agreement. So the slide up on the screen references what the city had been planning in terms of connectivity from Highland Croy to Post Preserve. Staff had coordinated the street connections that are currently proposed to be made with this proposed development with this conceptual plan that is up on the screen. Typically, the developer is responsible for funding and implementing any infrastructure improvements that are needed to mitigate the impacts of their development. However, as a result of the unique relationship between this proposed development and the planned post-preserve access modifications, as we've been calling it, associated with the interchange improvements, a non-traditional funding approach is being proposed to address the transportation improvements in this particular case. Nikki mentioned the developer was required to submit a traffic impact study for review and approval. And at this point in the process, the TIS has been reviewed and approved in substance by both Dublin and the Union County engineers staff. And we expect to have final approval of that TIS, of the document, yet this week and definitely prior to the second reading. So this next slide shows the proposed roadway network and connections, which Nikki also previously described. So I'm just going to review some of the highlights of the agreement at a pretty high level. Since Highland Croy Road is in Union County and under the jurisdiction of the Union County engineer, as Nikki also mentioned, we have been coordinating very closely with them and Jeff Stouch and his office throughout the entire process, and they do agree with the terms of the proposed infrastructure agreement. The cost-sharing approach that I will walk through is proposed with several strategic goals in mind. First, the city, we believe, is best positioned to very closely coordinate with ODOT the timing and details of the construction activities associated with the identified improvements on Highland Croy Road with the adjoining interchange improvements. Dublin staff are also in discussions with the Union County engineer about the scope of improvements to Highland Croy Road between Post Road and Park Mill Drive alongside this proposed development. And we're also talking about the opportunity to leverage the construction of the Post Road interchange and Highland Croy improvements and perhaps provide ultimately a more comprehensive improvement in partnership with Union County. Additionally, the unique location of the development, and specifically that Reserve A, which Nikki highlighted, provides an opportunity for a city gateway reserve area to include the preservation of cultural resources, including the historic barn and the granary. And we believe staff are best positioned to lead the final design of that reserve area to perhaps include a citywide gateway or entrance feature. So therefore, instead of Dublin and the developer sharing the costs of design and construction of the interior streets and the Highland Croy Road intersection improvements proportionately, this infrastructure agreement proposes Dublin design and construct the identified improvements on Highland Croy Road, and the developer design and construct all the interior streets. So this non-traditional cost-sharing approach maintains the city's anticipated funding commitment at a comparable level to that which was contemplated with the prior development that Nikki mentioned and the infrastructure agreement that had been considered back in late 2020. And as shown on this next slide, the developer or the infrastructure agreement proposes that the developer agrees to design and construct all internal roadways at their own cost. The city's contribution would be directed to the improvements to Highland Croy Road. We would agree to design and construct the improvements identified on Highland Croy at the proposed intersection of Springview Lane, which would be restricted to a right-in, right-out intersection with turn lanes on Highland Croy, Moorland Drive, which will be a signalized intersection with turn lanes, and Holbein Drive, which will be a full access stop controlled intersection. And there's also a shared use path that is planned to generally run parallel to and alongside Highland Croy between Post Road and Park Mill Drive. So those improvements would be accomplished as one project and coordinated very closely with the interchange improvements and ODOT. Additionally, the developer agrees to donate at no cost to the city parkland and reserve areas as depicted on the preliminary development plan, including the Gateway Reserve Area A. The developer will design and construct all stormwater management features required for the development, and then the city would follow up with the design and construction of any improvements in the reserve area, including landscaping, shared use paths, city entrance feature if desired, and cultural preservation of the structures. The developer would be responsible for the cost of all neighborhood entrance features at the access points to Highland Croy. The developer would donate all right-of-way to Union County and Dublin as appropriate for the land for which they are under contract to purchase. And the city will convert the Post Preserve Boulevard and Post Road intersection to a restricted right-in, right-out condition as had been planned for a number of years, or modifications that are planned at that intersection. And as is our standard practice, the developer is responsible for the costs and construction of all water and sanitary sewer extensions and improvements to serve this proposed development. And finally, we're looking at the potential creation of a residential TIF as we did for the Riviera development. So that wraps up the high-level overview. All the details are in the staff report and the agreement itself, which was attached to the legislation. And with that, staff recommends approval at the second reading on, well, not November 15th anymore, December 6th. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Megan. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there any present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion?
Is there any kind of examples yet for the entry features? You mentioned that the developer's paying for the entry features.
The entry features along Highland Croy Road are being discussed with planning staff, and Nikki's probably best able to answer that question.
Thank you.
Yes, so in terms of the entry feature design, those will be finalized with the final development plan. Right now, we're setting up the framework to allow us to design those. I would anticipate those would be very consistent with what you see north on Highland Croy, including stone, potentially limited application of fence rows, as well as rural character plantings.
Is there any theme to this particular development? I mean, I know it's high density and the units are packed in pretty tight, but is there, okay, so we're saving the barn and, you know, the outbuilding, but is there a theme there? Is there, have you had discussion on white picket fences or anything to sort of tie this whole thing together architecturally? Have you taken it to that level, or?
So I would defer to the applicant on the final theme. There are three primary architectural styles: traditional, classical, and craftsman. In terms of the landscape character, that will be directed by the community plan and will be under the review of Planning and Zoning Commission with the final development plan, excluding Reserve A, which will be under council's purview as a CIP project.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, Nick.
I just wanted to commend the work. I think it's a very interesting way to do it, and I appreciate that this structure. I think the residents will be highly appreciative of coordinating any work on the Highland Croy with the interchange and making, you know, those improvements. And I can only imagine this is going to be pretty tough when all of this goes underway for just a period of time. So the work to do to coordinate that with Union County and to maximize the deliverable for the amount of funds and the time it's going to take, I sincerely appreciate that. So just one quick question: those internal roads will be city streets, correct?
Yes, they will be public streets.
Great, thank you very much.
Other comments? I think the cost sharing of the infrastructure improvements that, as you laid out, are appropriate. You know, we've seen the difficulty of developing this site over time, and so I don't take issue with how that was laid out. So I don't know if any other council members do. That's probably the big ticket item. And then the residential TIF piece, maybe we'll have maybe some of the math on Ed's second reading on December the 6th for what that would look like.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. We will look back. We'll look forward to hearing that back on December the 6th as well, which will take us to introduction, public hearing, votes, and resolutions. We're going to take a really quick 3 to 5 minute break before we continue, because we have a lot of meat left here tonight. So very, very short break, and we'll be back in 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we will resume our meeting here. I didn't realize Andy wasn't. Okay, we will go ahead and with the introduction, public hearing vote resolution, Resolution 62-21.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police, Ohio Labor Council regarding wages and insurance for employees within the Communication Technician Bargaining Unit.
Thank you, and we'll go back to Mr. Rogers for our staff report.
Good evening again, Council. Resolution 6221 authorizes the city manager to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police, Ohio Labor Council, in regards to wages and insurance for employees within the Communications Technician Bargaining Unit. The term of this agreement has been tentatively agreed upon for Article 21, wages, and Article 22, insurance only. The term of these two articles will expire December 31st, 2023, when the full contract expires. Staff recommends that Council approve Resolution 6221, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none, Council, questions, discussion? Okay, Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Aludo? Yes. Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Emerald Grooms?
Yes. Thank you, Homer. Resolution 63-21.
Approving and accepting the preliminary plat for the planning of approximately 23.09 acres to establish one new parcel, approximately 7.354 acres, two reserves and public right-of-way in the Right-Way Corporate Park to be zoned SO, Suburban Office and Institutional, located northeast of the intersection of Riverside Drive and Emerald Parkway.
Thank you. We have Ms. Holt back. Welcome.
Thank you, and good evening again. This is indeed right-way corporate park, and it's the preliminary plat that we're looking at here. As a reminder from the last time that we talked about this, the location is at the northeast corner of Emerald Parkway and Riverside Drive. It's a total of 23.09 acres, including an economic development lot along Emerald Parkway, 2 reserve areas, including Ferris Wright Park, creation of a right-of-way for a cul-de-sac bulb on right-way, and no disturb zones. This property has long been identified for economic development, as you can see here, and this request will memorialize that vision along with the agreements that were made in 2018 with the neighbors at Grandee Cliffs. This is the preliminary plat in its entirety, and then I'm going to talk about it in detail on this next slide. The Ferris Wright Park Reserve B is not shown in its entirety just for legibility reasons here. But moving from left to right, Reserve A is created on the west side to protect the existing trees and slopes. And I have more background about the creation of that specific line on the next slide. No disturb areas are created on the north of the development lot to protect sensitive stream habitat. The development lot is in the middle there as labeled. The needed right-of-way to create that cul-de-sac bulb for right-way is shown next, and then Ferris Wright Park is shown just above that as Reserve B. And then finally, a landscape easement is created to protect the negotiated landscaping and screening for Grandee Cliffs to the east. So a series of environmental reports were created over approximately 1 year, and these reports involve both state and federal agencies as listed here. They were led by our consultant, Hull Environmental, and as part of this, the survey section within Hull created the plat based on what was found with the environmental studies. Reserve A is specifically created to address the preservation of those western woods. Additionally, our staff participated in some analysis and review, including site visits. The plat specifically was created to reflect the findings of the reports. And the GIS, it's a little bit deceptive because the GIS is showing a shadow line there. Reserve A does coincide with the top of the slope and the trees where it was not previously farmed. All platting criteria have been met for the preliminary plat. And at Planning and Zoning Commission, staff recommended approval with a condition which has been fully met. And the commission recommended approval, again with that condition, again fully met. And we are requesting approval of the preliminary plat tonight. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. I'd like to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council questions, discussion?
Could you go back a slide, please, Sarah? Right there, right there.
Yes.
I don't know if I recall seeing this environmental background at the Planning and Zoning Commission, but there is quite a bit of reassurance here when it comes to their discovery about the sensitivity of the woods and the stream and the cave areas. I think, obviously, the Reserve A and making sure that Riverside Drive and that area is maintained and all those tree and wooded areas are. So I really think the burden becomes the site to the north, probably whenever that is developed, because that stream bed is so important to the character of the greenway system relating from Riverside Drive over through the Bright Road area. One of the concerns of the Planning and Zoning Commission primarily was connectivity. The concern that as these sites are developed in the future, that we make sure that that greenway has enough buffer and enough space that a walking path, a bike path, whatever is necessary to go along that entire area is thoughtfully considered as these developments happen. And I think that is really where their impact and their concern came from. And that's why when I said I want to make sure that that planning and zoning concern is not ignored or is set aside. So whether or not this goes back to planning and zoning or even needs to, I think it needs to be at least documented that that there is, for the future, sensitivity to this entire conservation area.
Sarah, I'm assuming that Reserve A is a do not disturb area as well. It doesn't have the hash marks in it, but that would be a do not disturb.
That's right, and there's plat notes that explain that.
Right.
Yes.
And so you have the 75-foot along portions of the development lot, but then you'll have building setbacks other than that too. So can you tell me what the building setback is off of the rear lot line? What it would be on this?
It is dependent on the height of the building.
And if it is a two-story building as has been contemplated, what would that be? And I guess part of my question is does that clock start ticking outside of the 75-foot do not disturb zone, or does it start ticking at the property line?
So it's a formula, actually. So it's the height and the length of the building. So since we do not have a development concept in front of us, we can't give a specific number. It would be based off of the property line, but they wouldn't be able to encroach in that 75-foot or whatever the
And
depth
what would you
is.
imagine that might be, plus or minus, would it be around 100 feet? So you're probably going to hold the building off an additional 25 feet off of the no disturb.
And yeah, and as part of that, we would be, as the owner of that, we would have the latitude to help locate the building appropriately to be as far from that as we can and still allow for the developable area to be maximized.
Well, I'm pretty comfortable with letting that.
Yeah, I'm not uncomfortable with it either. It's because it was straight zoning. My concern was that we would have a building that was just right up against that 75-foot. I mean, I know you're going to have a setback, but, and who knows, this might turn into a PUD or whatever, but I think I just want to make the point that this is a precious piece of strip back there, and the development needs to be sensitive to that.
Okay, any other comments? All right, hearing none. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner? Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo? Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Thank you. Resolution 64-21.
Approving and accepting the final plat for the platting of approximately 23.09 acres to establish one new parcel, approximately 7.354 acres, 2 reserves and a public right-of-way in the right-way corporate park to be zoned SO, suburban office and institutional, located northeast of the intersection of Riverside Drive and Emerald Parkway.
Thank you. We'll stay with you, Ms. Holt. Your second time before us, and you're working overtime already.
Thank you so much. This is for consideration of the final plat, which will create the legal lots and easements and rights of way for this particular plat. We are still at the northeast corner of Emerald Parkway and Riverside Drive, and the acreage is 23.09 acres. This is the plat in its entirety, showing the location between Riverside Drive, Emerald Parkway, and Bright Road, and it includes the economic development lot along Emerald Parkway, the 2 reserve areas, including Ferris Wright Park, the creation of right-of-way for a cul-de-sac on right-way, no disturb zones, and then the landscape easement next to Grandee Cliffs. All plating criteria has been met for the final plat. And at Planning and Zoning Commission, staff recommended approval with a condition, which has been fully met. The commission also recommended approval, and we are requesting approval of this resolution for this final plat. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? Hearing none. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Ms. Saludo?
Resolution 65-21.
Amending the Dublin City Council Rules of Order.
Thank you. And we'll go back to Jennifer Raitler
Good
for the
evening
staff
again,
report.
members of council. The most recent version of the Council Rules of Order was adopted by Resolution 66-14 on August 25, 2014. Staff brought forward a draft of proposed revisions to the Rules of Order to the Administrative Committee, and the committee made a final recommendation to Council on October 5th. The draft rules were provided to Council with the proposed virtual meetings ordinance at the last meeting for Council's preliminary review. The direction provided by Council at that meeting was incorporated into this draft in sections 4.05 and section 8. Multiple revisions were made that are illustrated in the red line in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Take a moment for public comment. Is there anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? No. Very good. Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo? Mr. Peterson? Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Okay, resolution 66-21.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into contract with Frost Brown Todd LLC for the provision of legal services.
Thank you. And Mr. McDaniel, the general will be our staff report.
Good evening, members of council. I submitted to you a staff report resolution and proposed agreement with Frost Brown Todd LLC for services as law director. Jennifer Raitler is currently designated as law director. By way of background, the Dublin Revised Charter creates a Department of Law in Section 6.01. Pursuant to Section 6.03B, the Director of Law shall be appointed and removed by the city manager subject to the consent and approval of City Council. The Director of Law shall serve at the pleasure of the city manager and council. It's been the city's practice that the Director of Law be a contractual relationship. It's necessary for the city to have a contractual relationship with a legal firm with the appropriate capacities, experiences, and expertise to address the many operational aspects and issues that the city faces on a day-to-day basis and special legal circumstances and challenges. As council is aware, and as I previously stated, Jennifer Raitler of Frost Brown Todd LLC serves in the capacity of law director. In addition to Ms. Raitler's specific roles as law director, the current and proposed agreement for legal services, Frost Brown Todd LLC provides the breadth of legal experience and specialists that have effectively served the needs of the city. As pointed out in the staff report, several of the attorneys with Frost Brown Todd, comprising of the Dublin team, have many years of experience as attorneys and specifically with the City of Dublin. Jennifer's worked with the City of Dublin for 22 years and has been law director for 5 years. Additionally, as law director, Jennifer reviews, advises council and staff regarding legal services conducted by others on behalf of the city in the areas of economic development, bond counsel, and telecommunications. Key components of the agreement before you consist of, first, the proposed contract term January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2023. Second, routine services are defined in the agreement at a flat rate of $69,360 per month. Third, non-routine services as defined in the agreement at the rates set forth in the agreement. These rates remain the same as previous contract as discussed in the 2022 operating budget discussion and are stated in the agreement. Fourth, mayors and municipal court services as described in the agreement in the amount of $15,000 per month or $180,000 per year. As I stated in the staff report, I am of the opinion that the proposed rate for mayors and municipal court services is comparable to other cities, particularly when considering the level of experience and high level of service expected by our police leadership team and officers, somewhat comparable caseload with other cities, and the amount of work required to do case management both here in Dublin and at the Franklin County Municipal Court. Last, I did add to the proposed agreement that City Council and the City Manager conduct an annual performance review of the Law Director and hence the associated agreement. Not that we don't informally do this already. However, because of the nuance in the relationship per the city's charter, this contractual service acts much like a department head of the city and is in fact in that part of the charter, Section 6.03, Department Directors. This contractual relationship is different than other professional services in that sense and should be discussed in that context. As you know from the 2022 operating budget discussion, there was no increase requested in the overall legal budget, as we think the budget presented and approved by Council covers the cost of this agreement as proposed. I recommend approval of this resolution and the proposed agreement. Law Director Radler and her team have provided outstanding service to the city. We appreciate their many years of experience with the city and the breadth of service they provide not only to City Council but to staff on a day-to-day basis. There's a list of the many one-stop shop services they provide in the staff report. Separate from a vote on the resolution, I also recommend Council by motion and vote refer to its Finance Committee the task of discussing the frequency in which future legal service agreements should be competitively bid and selected. Finance Committee would report back to Council as a whole on the results of their discussion and or any recommendation. Again, unlike other professional services agreements engaged by the city, the Law Director and associated legal services are specifically addressed in Article 6 of the revised charter of the City of Dublin. The Law Director is charged with acting much like any other department director of the city and warrants discussion again in that context. Ms. Radler and I will try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Want to take a moment for public comment if there's anyone present that would like to speak relative to this legislation? Hearing none. Council, questions, discussion? Great.
Thanks, Mayor. You know, over the last several weeks, I've been in communication with Dana and staff and getting more information, which I think is the prudent thing to do. I mean, this is a very large contract that we sign, and reviewing it and making sure we're fully informed is our responsibility. And we've done that. And to be honest, I was much happier with the information that came out during the budgeting conversations than I kind of thought I was going to be. I think things are where they need to be. And when you think about, I look back over 10 years, which would have been 2 years before my last trip here to council, and I think about the monthly fee not increasing, and I think of what the increase in the legal activity in this community has. I mean, Bridge Park didn't exist 10 years ago. When you think about all of the things that they absorbed into that, what I refer to as the menu items, which are sort of the standard things that are covered in that flat fee, and you think about the increase, just the increased volume over 10 years, you know, and it's actually a relatively modest adjustment now to accommodate the volume that we're doing now. And then in that second bucket, the sort of the a la carte menu items, it certainly did not make up as much of the overall legal budget as I thought it was going to make up when I actually looked at the numbers. And so that struck me as reasonable as well. And then, thank you, Dana. Dana updated the percentages and sort of that third bucket or third space in this contract is the mayor's court, and the cases and the increased volume. You know, cases have increased in volume that they are handling. That's probably from a percentage increase. That's the mayor's court adjustment is more significant from a percentage increase than the rest of the monthly increase. But I think that's probably also in the area of reasonable, and you know, you get what you pay for. And I think that we do get outstanding legal advice. I also think the things that Dana has added to this sort of relationship, or our perspective and our review of the legal relationship we have with our legal counsel, the Finance Committee considering the RFP process and what exactly that would look like and how we factor that. I think that's a prudent and wise and reasonable thing for us to do, as we are responsible for the taxpayers, to the taxpayers, and how we spend our money. So how we think that through that process through in the very delicate area of legal counsel, I think that's a wise thing to do. And I appreciate Dana making that suggestion and also having the review with Jennifer during the year is also a very wise idea. You know, we review Dana, we review Jenny, and Jennifer certainly sits in a unique position similar to those two as far as our relationship with her. So I think communicating and keeping things on course throughout the performance of that contract is also a very wise thing to do. I have a tremendous amount of respect and confidence in this council in making the wise decisions and being a good steward of the taxpayer dollars, and I think we have done that here. And I'm sure, as the sun sets here on my career with council, I'm sure that this council is going to continue to do that into the future. And I think this agreement and the recommendations and the suggestions from Dana will allow us those guardrails to go through that process while also not losing sight of that unique relationship that we have with our lawyers. So because of all of that, ultimately, I'm comfortable with this contract. I think that it is in the realm of reasonable, and like I mentioned, you get what you pay for, and we get good legal advice, we get outstanding legal advice, and that is what the purpose of this contract is for. So for all of those reasons, I'm comfortable with the adjustment, and I would support this contract.
Great, thank you, Greg. Other thoughts, comments? Jane?
I was just going to say, I agree with Greg. The exercise of understanding and being able to explain to citizens when a contract that large comes forward is worth the effort, because it does tell us a lot about the value of the legal services we have. So I'm very happy that we did that exercise.
So we need 2 votes on this, correct? So the first vote will be on the resolution itself, and then we will have another motion to approve the staff's recommendations regarding the contract as outlined in the staff report. So the first will be on the resolution itself, and I would ask that Jenny please call the roll.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner? Yes. Ms. Aludo? Yes. Mr. Peterson? Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to move to Finance Committee, staff's recommendation regarding legal services contract and for review in the future.
Thank you, Jenny. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Okay, staff comments. General?
Thank you, members of council, for that, and I have nothing tonight. Thank you.
Okay, council reports, admin committee. Kathy?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Community Development Committee, Mr. Reiner.
Nothing, thank you.
Finance, Ms. Ludo.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Public Services, Ms. Fox.
We have a meeting this Wednesday. Yes.
Wednesday, okay.
And I just want to say that on the agenda for that is the France Road Shared Mobility, which is going to be fascinating, and I can't wait for it to be discussed. It will be, Greg, fascinating.
It will be hard to sleep between now and then, let me tell you.
You're gonna want to tune in.
Anticipation is.
Tune in.
Goodness. Okay, we will start roundtable. I'll start with you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Ludo.
Have a nice evening.
Mr. Reiner.
Yeah, it was just something I noticed about our signs staffs. We have a silver sign holding up all our stop signs and stuff, and our speed signs and our other signs. I just wondered what it would take on those metal signs to powder coat them either in a brown or in a gray. I noticed a competing city that we're close to that I don't want to mention actually has their sign posts aren't as interesting as ours, as far as ours are probably a couple inches. Theirs are just but theirs are painted and they actually disappear, where if you're driving down the street in Dublin and the sun's coming in from either the east or the west, you sort of see these silver swords that are holding up our signs. And just one of those subtle things that probably might be taken care of to make the overall city much more attractive. So just something for you to think about. So I want you to get out and take a drive around and take a look at and compare their kind of sign staffs that hold up our signage, our stop signs, and tell me what you think, because I think it's one of those very subtle things, but once it's been pointed out to me, it's become pretty obvious that, maybe this is something we could improve in our community. Thank you.
Here comes the bus. Mr. Keeler.
I'm good. Thank you.
Ms. Fox.
I'll just take a minute. At Planning and Zoning, I'm not doing a Planning and Zoning report, but at Planning and Zoning, one of the tasks that we're looking at is reviewing the general residential development standards. And since we had that conversation this evening, I made a copy of the memo on this, and I thought it might be interesting reading for you to just review, to take a look at what's currently in our code having to do with lot coverage, setbacks, and that sort of thing, and planned unit developments, and kind of what's coming before us now, off and on in this densities. And I just think it gives you a little, it helped me get a little background on what we've always adhered to in the past, and maybe what we're moving towards in the future when it comes to intensity and setbacks and lot coverage. It's, it's getting tighter now, and of course land isn't being made anymore, and we don't have that much of it left. So it's just, well, it's certainly a wonderful read with coffee. So I just would suggest maybe on just looking at the current code analysis and look to see what our current code says, and then where we're moving to. So it's my homework for you, I guess.
Jane, we've been here for 3 hours and you're giving us a homework assignment.
I know, it's awful.
As if the pending Public Services Committee wasn't enough to keep you up tonight. This should suffice.
All right, I ask for your forgiveness.
Kathy.
I had the pleasure this morning to welcome the Ohio Building Officials Association Conference. They're here for a couple days, and so that's wonderful to have groups meeting again, so was able to welcome them. So glad they're here. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank John and Dana and all of the veterans on our staff and our city for your service and your continuing service to this community. Thank you very much. And then finally, sort of on a sad note, but of appreciation, our condolences, I know, as council go out to Gene Bostic at the loss of his lovely wife, Pat. And so our sincere condolences to him and his family.
Thank you, Kathy. Just a few things that have happened since our last time together. Andy, Jane, and Kathy joined me for the HOA meeting on the 27th, and it was certainly very nice to have them in this place and good interaction with them. Thank you, staff, for putting on an informative meeting for them. We had our Morpsey visit on the 28th here. The Link Us project that's forthcoming is, I think, has the potential to be transformational to our portion of the region, and we welcome and look forward to those conversations. Glad to hear that all went well on Trick or Treat. I did not hear of anyone who melted, so that went off okay. We had Election Day on the 2nd, and we always thank anyone who is willing to put their name on the ballot, because as the 7 of us know acutely well, that is a terrifying thing to do and a very difficult experience. So we'd just like to thank the 2 folks that ran against each other on the east side, and really appreciate their willingness to serve the community and their willingness to put themselves out there for that. On the 3rd, I served on the Ohio Mayor's Alliance Education Advocacy Committee, and I'm going to be bringing, hopefully, Dr. Marchhausen into that with us. It's interesting to hear the things going on relative to municipalities with their educational systems. Unlike ours, most of their jurisdictional lines with their municipality. So we're in a very unique situation. On the 4th, Chief, close your ears. It was very fun to hear all the fireworks in celebration of Diwali, and certainly wish a wonderful celebration to all of our residents that celebrate that. We had a comma meeting on the 5th of November, and our own Jay Somerville represented on NREC and did a great job outlining what the pending legislation means for us and for our NREC folks. We also did get a $10,000 contribution from COMMA towards our broadband coalition, and want to thank them for that. And thank you this morning for being in my stead with the Ohio Building Officials Association. I'm sure they're having a delightful time in our fair city. I too thank you to all of our veterans and those that serve, and a heartfelt also out to Gene Bostic and his family. A tremendous loss for this community, and they have been just the stalwarts of servanthood in this community. So our thoughts and prayers are with them. And with that, we will stand adjourned.
Jennifer, congratulations. So